Chapter 1375. Poplar Fruit thought that he was just teasing the Guogan gang with a candle, but he did not expect that his teasing almost caused a prairie fire. After a few people passed on the rumors, G and a few other core members of the Guogan gang heard that it was no longer Poplar Fruit's version. Instead, some people mixed in the rumors and made it sound like they had witnessed the conspiracy with their own eyes. Those who could reach G's position would not be so easily deceived by their subordinates. However, when they thought about it, they realized that there was really a problem. The leader, the smoking addict, went back on his words. He said one thing and another. Just now, he swore upstairs that it was the rich guy called Gua who did it, but then he went back on his words, saying that he did not say it and that it was not Gua who did it. Fortunately, Little Six's family did not have any brothers, so no one stood up for them. Even if the smoking addict justified himself, no one cared too much. However, now that they suspected the Chinese gang, why did the smoking addict change his words and say that it was Gua who did it? Bullshit, rich people were all fat pigs who only knew how to order people around. How could he kill people? Moreover, how many people did he kill in one breath? It did not make sense. G had seen a lot of rich people crying after being kidnapped. He did not believe that young people like Little Six, who at least had guns and combat power, could be killed so easily. The only possibility was that someone thought of it just now. It was definitely the Chinese gang who did it. Only they would have the ability to kill 4 people in one go without alerting anyone. The more G thought about it, the more shocked and angry he became, especially when he thought about Smoker's behavior. Judging from all the signs, he was actually covering for the Chinese gang, allowing them to bully the people of Guogan gang as they pleased. Anger was just a trigger. Although G and a few other core members of the Guogan gang did not communicate, they began to think about their own escape route. Or rather, the entire Guogan gang strategy. It was impossible to reconcile with the Chinese gang, and it was difficult to fight them head-on. After all, they were few in number and weak. As the most prestigious member of the Guogan gang, G wanted to raise the flag and lead a dozen of his men to rebel. Then, he could either join someone else or gather his troops to fight against the Chinese gang. In any case, they did not want to be bullied by these cunning Chinese anymore. However, they were unwilling to give up before they got the money. Therefore, G's eyes flickered. He decided to make a fuss and let the smoker, who would not abandon them for the time being, make a decision. No matter what, only crying children would get candy. However, the smoker wasn't stupid. He didn't have great wisdom, but he was a grandmaster in scheming. The smoker narrowed his eyes as he looked at the group of ingrates with hatred in their eyes. They actually had the intention to rebel. A sharp glint flashed through the cigarette addict's eyes. But he didn't show it. The smoker suddenly put down the gun in his hand. His hand moved, but he didn't put it back into the holster. A bright smile blossomed on his face as he walked up. As if he didn't see the glossy muzzle of the gun, he gently patted the angry members of the Courage gang. All right. What was there to be angry about? We're all brothers. Put your guns away. The smoker unquestionably pressed down on the guns of the few important people in the front row and said with a glare, "What? Are you afraid that I won't give you a share of the money? Don't worry. Little Six and the others died, but they didn't die in vain. I, the smoker, guarantee that they will get the money that they deserve. Take it all. Our brothers in the mountains have principles. Since these brothers died, arrange for someone to give the money to their families. If there are orphans or widows, arrange for them to be taken care of, right? Why would we take their money? I'll leave it all to you, G." "Okay." The smoker patted G's shoulder and casually glanced at him, waving his hand generously. Okay. Boss, you're so wise. Boss, you're Bao Long too. June imitated the compliment one of the smoking addict's Chinese subordinates had given him and nodded with a smile. Okay, how could it not be okay? Ji was beaming with joy as he returned the bullets to his gun. He was overjoyed. Only the bandits who knew how to shout could get more money. They were the ones who had fought for this result. The smoker might have talked about compensating the families of the dead, but the money would definitely be divided among them. Who cared about the families of the dead? The dead were already dead, so who cared about their families? It seemed that the deaths of Little Six and the others were really worth it. 4 million for 4 people. Even if it was divided evenly, it would be hundreds of thousands per person. Of course, for G, this money would almost all go to his brothers. It was already good enough for the others to get some soup. However, for the people of the Guogan gang, this funeral had really become a happy occasion. Even G was so excited, let alone the others. The eyes of the short-sighted guys of the Guogan gang were all shining with excitement. Of course, the Zhonghua gang wasn't so willing to let these people have a share of the cake. But at least for now, the few small leaders of the Zhonghua gang were willing to listen to the smoker's orders. The smoker gestured for them not to act rashly, and they all calmed down the angry brothers behind them. Of course, the eyes of the few small leaders, including Sun Feng, were not so friendly. They were more shrewd than the uncultured Guogan gang members, but after all, they were just gangsters. They could endure it for a while, but they couldn't endure it forever. If the smoker didn't give them a satisfactory answer, even the smoker wouldn't be able to make them share the cake in their hands so easily. The smoker didn't bat an eyelid. He put his arm around G's shoulder and said with a smile, Okay, we're all brothers. Don't be unhappy. Right now, it's more important to get the money. Huzi, you guys take the hostages outside. Let's go to the factory and get ready to welcome the guests. Guests? That's our money bags. 100 million. You idiots. The smoker scolded his stupid cronies. But from an angle that G and the others couldn't see, he suddenly winked at Sun Feng and the other small leaders of the Zhonghua gang. Sun Feng and the others were shocked. They had been with the smoker for a few years, so they knew that this was a big move. Without batting an eyelid, Sun Feng made a gesture, and a dozen of the more trustworthy backbones quietly reached their hands into their pockets. Among the Guogan gang members, Poplar Fruit was the only one who was keenly aware that something was wrong. But how could he care about what was wrong? Seeing that his daughter was about to be taken away, he was anxious. He secretly tore off some of the customary decorations of the Guogan gang and quietly moved toward the Zhonghua gang, or rather, toward the factory entrance. The atmosphere unknowingly became somber. Chapter 1376. Uncultured gangsters were all like that. They would quarrel with you for the slightest benefit, but when the benefits exceeded their expectations, they would want to be your brother. Sun Feng looked down on these lazy poor people from the bottom of his heart. Normally, they only wanted to make quick money easily and then enjoy their lives comfortably. They would spend as much as they earned. This was the case when they were selling drugs, and it was the same when they were in the kidnapping business. As soon as they had money in their hands, they wanted to spend it as soon as possible. They would spend it all in just 2 days playing cards. Unlike the Chinese, they were more or less aware of danger. Although they often indulged in debauchery, everyone had secretly saved up a lot of money. Even if they stopped being bandits in the future, they could still save up some money to do other work. Therefore, Sun Feng was not willing to be associated with Ji and the others. He even thought that they were lazy black sheep and took a large amount of their money. He wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. Therefore, when the smoking addict signaled that he was ready to take action, he and a few of the Chinese gang members secretly whispered to a few of their confidants. They found a dozen trustworthy and reliable brothers and secretly formed a circle around the Guogan gang. Of course, the smoking addict still had his arm around Ji's shoulder and chatted happily. The topics that these rough men could talk about were nothing more than pornography and gambling. When they talked about what they were going to do with the huge sum of money after they had made a fortune, their interest soared all of a sudden. Hee hee. Ji rubbed his hands, revealing his dirty yellow front teeth. He smiled wretchedly. Then I'll have to buy 2 wives. One to give birth to babies, and the other to love. That's right. It's best if you take turns giving birth to babies. You won't be left out for a few months. The smoking addict patted Ji's shoulder with a fake smile. He laughed loudly, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. In terms of height, the smoking addict, who was born in the northern part of China, was a little thin, but he was still a head taller than these malnourished guys from Southeast Asia. Ji felt uncomfortable being hugged by the smoker, but he did not want to push the smoker away. He could only force himself to ignore the smoker's enthusiasm. However, both of them were talking loudly, and the people behind them could hear them. It was enough for their imaginations to run wild. The smoker glanced around and patted Ji's shoulder with a smile. He hugged Ji's arm and shouted, "Hey, Ji. If you have something to say, just say it. Why do you have to call me by my name?" Did she think that they weren't close enough with their arms around each other's shoulders? Ji turned to look at the smoker in confusion, but a black gun barrel suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. What? Ji was an experienced criminal who often struggled between life and death. When he saw the gun barrel, he felt suffocated, as if his life was hanging by a thread. His pupils dilated, and he struggled instinctively. However, the smoker had him in a death grip and couldn't move at all. Wait a minute. Before he could finish his sentence, the gun barrel that was as deep as a black hole had already spat out flames. Bang! There was a loud bang. It was really uncomfortable to be so close. Ji, the most prestigious member of the Guogan gang, had half of his head blown off. Red, white, and black brain matter exploded and stuck to the smoker's shoulder and face. The smoker didn't care about the disgust. He quickly turned around with Ji's dead body in his arms and used him as a shield. Most of the people didn't react in time. Only a few experienced leaders realized that something was wrong. Do it! Sun Feng roared. He took the lead and pulled out his pistol, shooting at the remaining leader of the Guogan gang. The leader was also brave. He reacted quickly and pulled a person beside him to block Sun Feng's bullets. He screamed and pulled out his pistol to fight back. Bang! There was another gunshot. The leader trembled as if he had been struck by lightning. Blood oozed out of his back, and he fell down weakly. It was the smoker who had shot him in the back. In an instant, gunshots rang out. The rest of the Guogan gang were also caught off guard by the dozen or so gunmen from the Chinese gang. They were cut down like wheat before they could even raise their guns. Of course, there was one who was more skilled. He was as fierce as Rambo. He screamed and waved his AK around. Several of the Chinese gang members were killed in an instant. But he didn't have a good end. He was shot full of holes by 5 or 6 guns. After all, he wasn't invulnerable like the Terminator. But other than the unlucky ones killed by the AK, the smoker and the Chinese gang took care of the rebellious Guogan gang almost effortlessly. Sun Feng felt good. He felt like every cell in his body had been injected with hydrogen. He felt like he was floating. As he cursed, Sun Feng kicked the members of the Guogan gang who were lying on the ground. The pistol in his hand didn't stop. He changed the magazine and shot at the heads of the people who hadn't died yet. The Guogan gang, which had been a big force in the group, had been wiped out. Other than the smoker, the others couldn't believe their eyes. They'd been talking and laughing, but the smoker had turned on them in an instant. He'd shot G in the head, and the dozen or so gunmen had slaughtered the rest of the Guogan gang. The rest of the people looked at the smoking addict, whose body and face were stained with blood. Not only did they not feel disgusted, but the reverence and worship in their hearts grew crazily like weeds. Only Sun Feng was still cursing. "How dare you steal my money? Eat shit." He wasn't satisfied with the last shot, so he kicked the dead. "All right. Sun Feng, they're dead. The share is ours. What's there to be afraid of?" The smoker said coldly. "Go call a few of your brothers. Go upstairs and take care of the 2 lookouts. We'll make sure there's no future trouble." Sun Feng didn't speak. A few of the more nimble ones rushed upstairs. "Wait. Where's she? Where's the girl?" The smoker roared. He pushed aside the crowd that was still looking at the dead body and rushed in the direction where Kiki had been tied up. The chair was empty. The ropes had been cut, and the 2 men who had been guarding it were lying on the ground. Their throats had been slit, and blood was flowing everywhere. Stunned, he turned around and saw a figure flash by the door. "Go!" the smoker roared. He had guessed that Poplar Fruit must have snuck in and rescued Ji Yunshu during the chaos. The smoker was about to explode. He didn't want to think about the consequences of this failure. These guys obeyed him because of the huge bounty. If he didn't fulfill his promise, even if he was still the leader, he wouldn't be able to escape the fate of being killed by his men. No, he hadn't run far. The smoker chased Ji Yunshu out of the factory and saw Poplar Fruit, who was only 50 meters away. There was no place to hide. The smoker gritted his teeth, took out his gun, and aimed at the tall figure. Chapter 1377. Poplar Fruit had retreated to the back when the Zhonghua gang had surrounded the Guogan gang. Fortunately, he had discovered it early, or else he would have been dragged into the whirlpool of gunfire. Poplar Fruit's heart was beating very fast. When the gunshots rang out, he immediately realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He didn't care about stealth at all. He directly shook off the large group and strode toward the 2 men who were preparing to carry Kiki. The 2 men didn't react for a while, or rather, their attention was attracted by the infighting in front of them. When they saw Poplar Fruit walking over, one of them curiously asked Poplar Fruit, "Hey, brother, is it?" However, the latter half of his words came to a halt before he could finish. Poplar Fruit was expressionless. 2 sharp long knives suddenly slipped out from his sleeves. He had taken them out just now, and then hid them in his clothes with a magic trick. The 2 men were shaken by this miraculous scene and subconsciously lowered their heads to look. However, the saber rays poured down like moonlight and instantly filled their eyes. When they reacted, their throats were already broken and filled with blood, which didn't allow them to react. Poplar Fruit's knife skills weren't too fancy. The 2 simple knives followed different trajectories and cut the throats of the 2 men at the same time. At the same time, Poplar Fruit also moved toward Kiki, who was tied to the chair in a daze. The knife passed, and the rope was cut. Poplar Fruit was wild with joy. He passed the 2 knives to his left hand, squatted forward, and held Kiki's weak body with his right hand. The little girl had suffered too much. She hadn't eaten for 2 days, and her bones seemed to have become lighter. The first thing that caught Poplar Fruit's eyes was Kiki's hands and feet that had been tied up. The purple rope marks were shocking, and Poplar Fruit couldn't help but shed tears on his daughter's face. Perhaps feeling her father's heartbeat, the little girl with a pale face and cracked lips finally moved. She cried in a hoarse voice, "Papa." Her voice was really very low. Kiki's forehead was hot, as if she had a fever. She didn't even have the strength to open her eyes, but her little hand holding Poplar Fruit's clothes was unusually strong. "Father is here." Young Guo's mouth opened and closed as 2 lines of hot tears rolled down her cheeks. She said silently. It wasn't that he couldn't make a sound, but that he couldn't. He couldn't alarm these bandits. However, Poplar Fruit seemed to be able to communicate with his daughter's heart. Bit by bit, he conveyed his vow, "Don't worry, Papa will get you out of here safely." Looking at his daughter's pitiful appearance, Poplar Fruit felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart, but he didn't have time to look at his daughter. He didn't even have time to wipe the tears off his daughter's face. Poplar Fruit clearly realized that he was still in the enemy's camp. Even if he was holding his daughter, there were still bandits with guns and shouting around him. The only thing he could do now was to escape. It had to be said that it was really not easy for Poplar Fruit to control his emotions at this time. However, these emotions of joy and sorrow from seeing his daughter again were not completely unaffected. His judgment was affected. In this case, the best situation was to take Kiki and sneak upstairs while the crowd was in chaos. With the help of the complex structure of the factory, they could play hide and seek with the bandits. With Poplar Fruit's superb skills and his understanding of the factory, he could have lasted for a long time. However, Poplar Fruit didn't do that. At that time, he only had one choice in his mind, and that was to take Kiki and escape from this bandit's nest. It wasn't hard to understand. Poplar Fruit had already killed all of the enemy's lookouts. As long as he successfully escaped from the factory and jumped over the wall that wasn't too high, the bandits wouldn't be able to catch up with him in the forest. Only then would Kiki be truly saved. Therefore, he bent over and used his body to cover his daughter as he secretly moved toward the door. Unfortunately, the cigarette addict was too sharp and immediately noticed the problem. Poplar Fruit heard the screams behind him, but he could only rush out of the door and flee. Poplar Fruit ran very fast. If someone measured his speed, they would see that Poplar Fruit, who was carrying my daughter, was running as fast as a seated athlete in the national games in the 100-meter race. However, no matter how fast a person was, he couldn't be faster than a bullet. Poplar Fruit, who was only more than 20 meters away from the nearest wall, could only watch helplessly. When he heard the gunshots behind him, Poplar Fruit subconsciously curled up his body to protect Kiki. Bang! 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 The bullets hit the ground, the wall in front of him, and the trees in front of him. The splashing stones and sawdust were like a rain of bullets, sweeping toward Poplar Fruit. Humph! With a muffled sound, Yongguo felt as if her right leg had been stared at by a large wasp. She couldn't exert any strength in her next step. As a result, while running at high speed, her front and back legs tripped, and Yongguo fell heavily. Even Kiki was dizzy from the fall. However, with her father's protection, she wasn't seriously injured. Stop! 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 The important thing had to be repeated 3 times, but the smokers still angrily smacked the guns in their hands. Only then did they stop. Are you going to kill him? If you kill him, who will pay you? The cigarette addict shouted angrily as he slapped one of the men's faces. At this moment, Poplar Fruit had just sat up. However, the cigarette addict's men had already caught up to him. They formed a circle and pointed their guns at Poplar Fruit, looking at him cautiously. Although Poplar Fruit looked pitiful after being shot, they knew that the man in front of them was not someone to be trifled with after seeing their throats slit by Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's leg was in pain. The bullet had bitten his thigh from behind. It didn't pierce through, but the finger-sized hole was bleeding profusely. Poplar Fruit clenched his teeth and concentrated his energy to close the wound on his right thigh. He couldn't stop the bleeding, but the bleeding slowed down a lot. But what was the use? With more than 20 guns pointed at him, Poplar Fruit knew that even if he was possessed by Zhang Sanfeng, he wouldn't be able to fight his way out. He smiled bitterly in his heart. He felt hopeless. It was so close, yet so far. Poplar Fruit couldn't escape. He hugged his daughter tightly in his arms. The little girl woke up from the fall. She didn't know what was going on, but she felt safe in her father's arms. She buried her head in her father's chest and fell asleep happily. Don't cry anymore. Silly girl. I'm useless. I couldn't save you in the end. I'm sorry. Chapter 1378. No matter how noisy his subordinates were, the smoker kept sizing up Poplar Fruit. His ugly triangular eyes stared at Poplar Fruit's face like a snake's. It really was him. The smoker had seen those reports and videos, so he could recognize Poplar Fruit even if he turned into ashes. However, when he saw the real person standing in front of him, the smoker's heart couldn't help but thump. This was the person who had been his nightmare for the past few years. Even if he hadn't had nightmares for the past year, Poplar Fruit was still the hurdle in his heart that he couldn't get over. Poplar Fruit calmed down. Whether he lived or died, he had lost the ability to control his own fate. If that was the case, then the father and daughter would face life and death together. Now that Kiki was in his arms, and he was hugging his daughter tightly, it was as if he had returned to the night when the little one suddenly appeared. He was helpless, but they were connected by blood and would live and die together. Moreover, no one could separate them now, so he wasn't afraid anymore. The only regret he had was that if he died, then he would have let down Fong Beibei's love for him. Thinking of the girl who had cried so much but was so determined before she left, Yang Guo sighed faintly in her heart. Right, there was still Zheng Yujie. Poplar Fruit thought of her. He felt sorry for her perseverance. If he couldn't survive, then she had to find a good family and a man who loved her deeply. She had to live well. Of course, Poplar Fruit hadn't completely lost his will and hope to live. He still had one last trump card. Big Brother he and the others were rushing over at full speed. Poplar Fruit didn't know when they would arrive, so he hoped that he could drag it out until they arrived. That way, there would be hope for survival. Poplar Fruit wasn't annoyed by the bandit leader's strange look. He only glanced at him coldly. You didn't even make a sound after being shot. You're a real man. The smoker's voice became a little sharp. It wasn't a compliment at all. His eyes were full of mockery. He beckoned for his men to bring over the 2 Miaodao that Poplar Fruit had left at the entrance of the factory in order to run faster. The Miaodao was so heavy that ordinary people would find it difficult to hold it with one hand. He just casually threw them in front of Poplar Fruit. Of course, there was a distance of 4 or 5 meters between them. With so many people holding guns, they were not afraid that Poplar Fruit would suddenly hurt them. TSK, People's Hero Poplar Fruit, you're relying on these 2 swords to survive, aren't you? At this moment, the smoker seemed to have untied a heavy knot in his heart. He was so pleased with himself that he started mocking, bullshit hero of the people. Why don't you try using your knife in front of our guns? Give it a try. Poplar Fruit frowned and looked up at him. The wound on his leg was very painful. The bullet was still lodged in it. This was the first time he had been shot. His black trousers were soaked in blood, but Yang Guo clenched his teeth. He didn't want to show his unbearable pain to these bandits, but his left hand was tightly gripping the grass. Blue veins were popping out. It was obvious what kind of pain he was enduring. You have nothing to say. Weren't you quite talkative when you were receiving the award? The smoker mocked. You're the person who escaped from the bank robbery in XX County. Poplar Fruit suddenly said, which stunned the smoker for a long time. How did he know? He wanted to say it, but he hadn't even started. How did he know? He hadn't escaped just now. Instead, he had been injured and surrounded. Poplar Fruit had been a little too pessimistic. However, at this moment, Poplar Fruit's brain had calmed down. Although it was very painful, it didn't stop him from analyzing rationally. In Poplar Fruit's opinion, the smoker's words were too vague. It wasn't as vicious and cunning as when he had dealt with the Guogan gang in the factory. What he had said when he received the award reminded Poplar Fruit. This person in front of him had been paying attention to him for a long time. If he wasn't an enemy, why would he pay so much attention to Poplar Fruit's situation? Moreover, didn't Big Brother he help him analyze the possible origins of the bandits who had kidnapped Kiki? Now that Poplar Fruit had calmed down and thought about it, he felt that the smoker's personality was very similar to the 3 bank robbers from before. Cruel, sinister, and unscrupulous. This was He Wenjua's evaluation after looking at their previous cases. Humph. The smoker froze for a while, then snorted coldly and said, "It seems that you've guessed it too. But it doesn't matter. Since you're going to die, I'll let you know. I'm the one who wasn't caught by you. He's still on the wanted list, yeah. The smoker laughed strangely and said, "So what? People like us who exchange our lives for riches and honor have always been a thorn in the side of the police. But can they catch us? Do they dare to come to Myanmar to catch me? So, you captured my daughter in order to kill me and avenge your brothers." Poplar Fruit's right hand held his daughter tightly, and his left hand loosened. He endured the pain and stood up with his left foot. Poplar Fruit would rather stand in pain than look up at these bastards. However, when he stood up, the robbers around him were so scared that they took 2 steps back. The smoker slapped them and scolded, "Useless. You're even afraid of a cripple." However, the small leaders who heard their conversation did not look happy. Sun Feng's face was cold as he asked, "Leader, don't you think you're being unkind? Are you joking with all of our lives? If you want revenge, why mention the 100 million and let our brothers risk their lives for you?" The smoker's killing of Lucky had scared a lot of people, but it would never scare old foxes like them. They knew that without their help, the smoker would have been shot to death. Yes, they respected the smoking addict as their leader and were willing to risk their lives for him. That was because the smoking addict could bring them glory and wealth. However, it did not mean that they would be willing to be used by the smoking addict and help him count money for nothing. The smoker's face darkened as he shouted, "Sun Feng, you've been with me for 2 years. Have you ever seen me like this? Many people from the Guogan gang died in the past, but they didn't even know that they were betrayed by the smoker. I'm taking revenge. Revenge my ass. Those people who died in his hands were not related to me. Even if they died, I would still laugh for 2 days. Is there a need for me to reject money?" The smoker said arrogantly. His voice was so loud that all the people present could hear him clearly. "I kidnapped him because he's a billionaire." That was true. Sun Feng and the others had seen the information when the smoker and his men had gathered. Otherwise, they would not have kidnapped a child. If word got out, they would not be able to be bandits anymore. "Did you bring money? If you didn't, don't think about leaving here alive." Sun Feng did not trust the smoker who went back on his word. He asked Poplar Fruit with a gloomy face. "Yes." Poplar Fruit looked at them coldly but still nodded. For the time being, he did not want to provoke the murderous intent of these bandits. If he said that he did not bring money, he and Kiki would be shot to death by a group of red-eyed people, let alone the smoker. Brother Feng." A lackey who had just gone upstairs ran over in a panic. Not good. Chapter 1379. Big Brother. Brother Feng. The underling who ran over saw the mysterious atmosphere between Sun Feng and the cigarette addict. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva and address Sun Feng dryly. Then, he said in a panic, something bad happened. The people upstairs are all dead. What? What did you say? Not only Sun Feng, but the cigarette addict also shouted nervously. They're all dead. The underling squeezed out a few drops of tears and said, the second floor and the roof are all dead bodies. There were more than 30 people, and they're all dead. Why did he have to pretend to be sad? Because he knew that one of the dead people was actually the younger brother of a gang leader with the surname Mo. Gang leader Mo couldn't hold back anymore. He rushed up, grabbed the underling's collar and asked, what did you say? Are you kidding? Our Mo boy. Big brother Mo. He's dead too. The underling shouted in fear. Except for us who just went up, everyone else is dead. You brought an outsider here. Sun Feng pulled the bolt and looked at Poplar Fruit fiercely. He was close to gang leader Mo, and Mo boy, who was dead, was also one of his people. Not to mention, the 30 people that the underling mentioned were almost all from the Chinese gang. I came alone. Poplar Fruit said coldly, looking at the barrel of his gun. Enough. The cigarette addict pushed Sun Feng's gun up and said sternly, Sun Feng, don't you want money? How did they die? The cigarette addict turned to the underling and asked. He didn't believe that Poplar Fruit had brought other people. After all, the border was there. Besides, if there were other people, how could Poplar Fruit be caught by them? Some had their throats slit, some were shot to death, and some had their necks twisted behind their backs. The underling looked at gang leader Mo timidly. The last sentence was, of course, meant for him. I will kill you. Junior leader Mo's eyes were red. He pulled out the gun in his hand and was about to rush toward Poplar Fruit. However, he was stopped by Sun Feng this time. In the end, junior leader Mo, who was already in a mess, fired his gun into the sky, and was then disarmed and pushed away. Can a dead person be resurrected? The smoker was right. Instead of trying to take revenge, it was better to get the ransom money and the piece of cake that they had been craving for a long time back. Sun Feng was different from Ji. He was a smart man, and a smart man with good eyesight. Hand over the money, and I'll let you go. He looked at Poplar Fruit coldly. The gun in his hand was still loaded, and the threat was obvious. Poplar Fruit also looked at the other coldly and asked, why should I believe you? These words had several meanings. Some were doubtful. If you said you would let me go, would you really let me go? There were also those who tried to sow discord. Between Sun Feng and the team leader next to him, it was hard to say who had the final say. The meaning of these words was different in everyone's ears. The key was how they heard it. The smoker had no intention of going against Sun Feng. He was like an emperor who had been robbed of his power, but he could still be the emperor in name. He interrupted and said, do you have any other choice? Sun Feng didn't want the smoker to shut up. They were both smart people. He knew that he couldn't fall out with the smoker directly. The smoker still had a few trusted aides in the crowd, and Sun Feng might not be able to convince the remaining 20 to 30 people. However, they seemed to have reached a consensus at this moment. They wanted money. Sun Feng snorted and said impatiently, hurry up and hand over the money. Otherwise, don't blame us for being ruthless and killing your daughter. This wasn't a threat. These desperados had reached the point where there was nothing they couldn't do. Speaking of which, they had to thank the smoker. He had been suppressing these people with iron blood. Of course, he was also worried that Poplar Fruit would fight them to the death in a fit of anger. Therefore, Although Kiki was tied to the chair and looked miserable, she wasn't harmed at all. Poplar Fruit was silent for a moment before saying softly, "It's in the south. There are a few rocks by the wall. The money box is hidden there." Suddenly, the eyes of the 20 or so bandits lit up like bright light bulbs, brighter than the sun that had just risen in the sky. It even caused a small commotion, but it was quickly suppressed by Sun Feng and a few other team leaders. "You, go and get the money," Sun Feng commanded. The person he sent out was his trusted aide. "Wait." Sun Feng's face suddenly turned gloomy. He looked around and called his trusted aide back. With the money in front of him, it seemed that he couldn't trust anyone now. "Let's go together." In the end, it was Poplar Fruit who carried Kiki. Enduring the pain in his leg, he staggered in front. A large group of people surrounded him as they walked out of the factory and walked to the money box hidden in the rocks. Hee. In the middle of the crowd, the smoker, who seemed to have lost control of his subordinates, sneered secretly. It wasn't just Poplar Fruit, who was pretending to be calm, or Sun Feng, who thought that he had successfully seized power. He actually had a deep plan in mind. "All of you must die." When the money box was opened, the bright red stacks of money made everyone's eyes turn red. Even the guy in charge of opening the box trembled and almost threw the stack of money in his hand to the ground. However, Sun Feng pushed Poplar Fruit fiercely. The unsteady Poplar Fruit was pushed to the ground. He only cared about protecting Kiki. The broken rocks on the ground made him grimace. "Are you kidding me? This is 100 million. Sun Feng was furious. He pulled the trigger of his gun and fired at the ground beside Poplar Fruit's feet. "Where's the money?" Poplar Fruit grimaced, but he laughed. "Do you think I can run around here with 100 million? Am I Superman?" Of course, this was sarcastic. Poplar Fruit paused, but still gave Sun Feng face. He said, "This is only 2 million. As for the other 100 million, let me go, and I'll ask someone to transfer the money to the account you gave me." That's right. Sun Feng had been so focused on the benefits he could enjoy after seizing power that he had forgotten about this. Back then, they had agreed that the money would be transferred into 10 different bank accounts. His face turned red and white, but he kicked Poplar Fruit's injured leg. Ah! Although Poplar Fruit's perseverance was amazing, his injured leg was connected to his heart. After being kicked on the wound, he didn't dare to dodge. He suffered a loss and couldn't help but cry out. At this time, Kiki's closed eyelashes trembled and she opened her eyes. In a daze, she saw the twisted expression on her father's face. She called weakly, "Papa, Papa." "No, Dad is fine." Poplar Fruit pressed his daughter's head tightly in his arms, for fear that she would attract the attention of these bandits. "Dad will find a way to get you out." Chapter 1380. Yang Gua steadied his temper. No matter how much he was beaten or scolded, he didn't make a sound. However, he felt helpless in his heart. He was wondering why he still hadn't seen Big Brother he and the others arrive after so long. "Brothers, it's been an hour. If you don't come, I'll be dead." In fact, Poplar Fruit didn't know that he Wenjue and the others had already arrived at the factory. After all, they weren't familiar with the Burmese forest. It took them some time to locate the factory. They weren't like Poplar Fruit, who had been here in his dream. However, after arriving, he Wenjue and the others didn't dare to act rashly. They still followed the route from the roof and sneaked up to the roof of the factory. They knocked out the only guy who was on the lookout. He Wenjue and the others didn't hit him as hard as Poplar Fruit. After all, they were regular soldiers. They didn't attack with hatred like Poplar Fruit did. After knocking him out, this guy would sleep for half a day. It was much better than going to hell in a daze. Wenjue and the others were stunned when they saw the corpses that Poplar Fruit left behind in the factory. However, when Wenjue and the others got a good look at the entire factory, they realized that the situation wasn't right. Why was Poplar Fruit being pointed at by more than 20 people? Of course, they didn't know that because of Poplar Fruit's freaking skills and his performance in assassinating dozens of people, every gangster who faced Poplar Fruit didn't dare to let their guard down. Even if someone wanted to slack off and put down their gun, they would be yelled at by the nervous brothers around them. "Are you trying to get us killed?" They couldn't help but be nervous. When had they ever seen someone who could kill so many of their brothers silently? This was a terrorist on the level of the Grim Reaper. Who would dare to let him out of their control? They didn't want to be like their brothers who had their throats cut off and reported to the King of Hell before they could enjoy the riches and glory. Wenjue and the others squatted on the rooftop and watched as a large group of people surrounded the Poplar Fruit. Then, they brought the Poplar Fruit out of the factory. During this series of actions, they did not find a chance to make a move. "Don't act rashly," Wenjue said calmly. If they acted rashly, those fugitives would definitely kill Poplar Fruit first and then fight with them. Yang Jingdong raised his beloved Barrett sniper rifle. This was a model he bought from overseas, so carrying it would not expose his identity as a Chinese soldier, and stood up in annoyance. He bent over and said to Wenjue, "This angle isn't good. It's blocked by the wall, so I can only see the outermost two." Wenjue nodded calmly and said, "Go find your own hiding spot. Be careful." It was not a problem to communicate using the radio. The main problem was that Poplar Fruit was surrounded by so many guns. Even Wenjue and the others, who were elite special forces, found it difficult to handle. Wenjue secretly cursed Poplar Fruit in his heart, "Motherfucker, who told you to be stubborn?" If Poplar Fruit was his subordinate and did not listen to orders, he would have slapped him long ago. If Poplar Fruit had endured for another hour and waited for Wenjue and the others to arrive, they would definitely not be in such a predicament now. Not to mention anything else, when Poplar Fruit fled with Kiki, at least Wenjue and the others could provide support. A grenade or something was enough to make Poplar Fruit escape. However, Poplar Fruit was not just a special forces soldier on a mission. He was a father first and foremost. His daughter was kidnapped, and there was a glimmer of hope to rescue her. How could he not be anxious? Well, it was too late to say anything now. Now, he had to think about how to find a chance to rescue Poplar Fruit and his daughter. Wenjue patted Meng Sanhua and pointed to a bunker by the wall downstairs. Meng Sanhua understood the order without needing to say anything. He climbed the edge of the building and the window and jumped over in a few steps. Yang Jingdong sniped from afar and provided cover. Wenjue observed and gave orders from above. Meng Sanhua, who was the best at close combat, approached and prepared for action. The three of them were ready for a three-dimensional battle. On Poplar Fruit's side, Sun Feng asked someone to pass him the phone they found on Poplar Fruit. He said stiffly, "Get someone to transfer the money." "Wait." Sun Feng thought of something. He turned to the smoker and asked, "Where is the account number?" "It's in the factory." "Let's go back to the factory and take care of this." The smoker could not help but look at the 2 boxes of money and the luggage bag. The 2 million yuan was very tempting. He reached out to grab one of the boxes as if he wanted to be Sun Feng's underling. "Haha, if I were you, I wouldn't touch the money now." Sun Feng looked at the smoker and said. Seeing the smoker retract his hand, he said lightly, "Don't worry, boss. The money is still yours as long as we get the money too." To be honest, if the 100 million yuan was in his account, Sun Feng would not care about the 2 million yuan. He would just throw it to the smoker. "Haha, Yes, yes. Wait for the money. You have fewer people now, so you will get a few million more. The smoker laughed dryly. He was a little unhappy. Although Sun Feng still called him boss, it was obvious that Sun Feng did not treat him as a boss anymore. However, he had to endure it for now. Every word of the smoker was meaningful. The 20 gunmen around him could not help but grin. If it were not for the fact that most of the gunmen were Sun Feng's underlings, who were downstairs and died the least, they might have turned to the smoker. This was truly a generous boss. Sun Feng was not stupid. He clapped his hands and grinned. Don't worry. Once the money is in our hands, we will definitely share it with everyone. Then, we will live a good life. We will buy 2 cars, one to look at, and one to drive. We will marry 2 women and have a threesome every day. He did not say much, but he painted a big picture. It was enough to make the gunmen who admired the luxurious and desolate life change their minds. The smoker's eyes flickered, and he laughed. Yes, yes. Sun Feng, let's go back to the factory. How dangerous is it in the wilderness? The more he said this, the more Sun Feng felt that the smoker was lying. He said seriously, no need to rush back. I will stay here and watch him transfer the money. Humph, if you don't transfer the money, I will bury you 2 here later. However, Sun Feng was not completely at ease. The smoker was not exaggerating when he said that it was dangerous outside. With the factory as cover, it was much safer than in the wilderness. Sun Feng hesitated and looked at the cigarette addict. Then, he pointed and called out 3 names. They were all the cigarette addict's most loyal followers. He said, you 3 and the rest of you, spread out and patrol the mountain. If you find anything, report it immediately. This was to minimize the threat of the smoker. The smoker's face darkened. He looked at his 3 subordinates and nodded helplessly. He only added, be careful. Bear with it. Chapter 1381. Wenjuo was overjoyed when he saw 6 people walk out of the group and scatter into the forest. He knew that this was a rare opportunity to reduce the enemy's resistance. Immediately, he relayed the message through his earpiece. Yang Jingdong, who had been hiding in a tree, slid down like a nimble snake. He didn't carry any weight with him, and even his beloved Barrett was left on the tree. Yang Jingdong pulled out a dull dagger from his waist and dashed out like a rabbit. Although he was a sniper and was not as skilled as Poplar Fruit, Yang Jingdong's tactical skills were much better than his. Looking at Poplar Fruit's 2 large miaodao and Yang Jingdong's palm-sized dagger, it was easy to tell who was more professional. Yang Jingdong had a better future as a sniper than as an assassin. For example, Meng Sanhua was assigned as the latter in the special forces. After all, he was too skilled. However, Yang Jingdong had more than enough to deal with these small fries. The small fries spread out. They didn't just stand there casually. They seemed to be coordinating with each other from afar. For example, the 3 trusted aides of the smoking addict stood 10 meters apart. They didn't sense Yang Jingdong's arrival but were wary of their own people. They were afraid that the other 3 people sent by Sun Feng would suddenly attack and kill them. After all, the smoking addict had lost his power and Sun Feng was plotting something. Yang Jingdong had a headache when he saw this. He decided to start with the other 3 first. They were standing a little apart and looked lazy. They were much worse than the smoking addict's trusted aides. Under the cover of the thick tree trunks in the forest, he approached the outermost target step by step. The pair of thick mountain boots on his feet stepped on the soft leaves. The force exerted was very precise and did not cause any extra movement. When he approached, Yang Jingdong even held his breath to prevent the other party from noticing. Yang Jingdong suddenly pounced from behind. Although he wasn't considered tall in the barracks, he was much taller than these southerners. Like a tiger pouncing on a donkey, he restrained the other party in an instant. The guy who was restrained subconsciously wanted to scream, but his mouth was already covered by Yang Jingdong. Gun. The second thought of the criminal who often struggled on the edge of life and death was to pull the trigger. Even if he didn't hit the person behind him, he could use the gunshot to alert his brothers. His brothers were only a few dozen meters away and could definitely rush over. However, his eyes were filled with fear. Why couldn't he pull the trigger? The trigger of the AK seemed to be welded. How could it be welded? It was Yang Jingdong who had inserted his finger into the space behind the trigger. It was impossible for him to pull the trigger. Before the criminal's poor brain could think of another way to escape, such as letting go of the gun and pulling out the dagger at his waist, Yang Jingdong raised his right hand, which was in the trigger, and the other party's AK. He was a special warfare elite after all. The strength of one of his hands was actually greater than the strength of the opponent holding down the AK with two hands. The subdued criminal watched in panic as Yang Jingdong slowly raised his right hand. His right hand was actually holding a dagger that was radiating with a dim light but exuding a cold aura. In a panic, the criminal abandoned the AK and tightly grasped Yang Jingdong's right wrist with both hands. However, what made him despair was that his two arms full of needle holes were thin and weak. They couldn't be compared to Yang Jingdong's muscular arms. He watched helplessly. The tip of the dagger was at his throat. It scratched a bit of skin but didn't bleed. He watched helplessly. The dagger pierced into his throat bit by bit. He felt the air and life leaving him. Finally, Yang Jingdong threw the dead criminal aside and hid behind a tree. Then, he slowly moved on to the next one. On the other side of the wall, Sun Feng was no longer on guard against the smoking man because he was surrounded by his brothers and the smoking man was alone. He discussed with a few of the leaders of the Zhonghua gang and took out 5 bank accounts. He wrote them on his phone and gave them to Poplar Fruit. Transfer the money. Transfer it to this account. Once the money is in, I'll let you go. Sun Feng said stiffly. Poplar Fruit seemed to be distracted. He was listening to the birds in the forest. At first, he didn't notice it because it was early in the morning. It was normal for birds and insects to chirp in the forest. But later, he heard a special bird call. Why was it special? On one hand, it was the timbre. It was slightly different from other bird calls. But Poplar Fruit could tell. Poplar Fruit realized that it wasn't a bird call at all. It was because of the frequency of the call. Although it was slower, Poplar Fruit realized that it contained the rhythm of Morse code. They're here. Wait for your chance. Yang Guo was able to decipher the Morse code that was repeatedly simulated by the chirping of the birds. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit was happy. He knew that it was definitely Big Brother he and the others who made the bird call. They were here. However, as they said, they needed to wait for the opportunity. There were still more than 20 guns pointed at him. Not to mention Big Brother he, even if the entire special forces came, there was no way to save Poplar Fruit and Kiki without injuring them. They could only wait for the opportunity. Or, Poplar Fruit could create the opportunity. His head was spinning, so he seemed to be distracted. For a moment, Sun Feng was unhappy. He slapped him and scolded, "Did you hear that? Hurry up and transfer the money. If you don't have the money, this day next year will be your death anniversary." Sun Feng didn't see how those brothers died, and he relied on his numbers to bully Yang Guo, who didn't dare to fight back. Poplar Fruit resisted the urge to attack. He had a way to kidnap Sun Feng before anyone could react, but what was the use of that? Sun Feng's leadership position hadn't been established yet. Many people wanted him dead, such as the team leader. This person must be a threat. Yang Guo glanced at the cigarette addict, who was still in the mood to laugh even after his power was taken away. Yang Guo had this feeling. Your accounts are from the Myanmar Bank. Glancing at those accounts, Poplar Fruit, who had an excellent memory, knew that those were 5 of the 10 bank accounts from before. As for the rest, they were probably from the Guogan gang and had been crossed out. He raised his head and said indifferently, the overseas transfer will only be received the next day. TSK. Sun Feng raised his head and looked at Poplar Fruit with contempt. He said, do you really think that we're country bumpkins because we're in the mountains? Do you know what international express remittance is? The remittance will be received in 5 minutes. Hurry up and make the call, or don't blame me for slapping you. They were a group of robbers who often dealt with banks. It seemed that they had made a lot of money through international kidnappings. Chapter 1382. Poplar Fruit frowned as he looked at the phone in his hand. Should he call them or not? He had to call them, but if he did and the money was transferred, would these fugitives give him any chance to live? He even believed that as soon as the money was transferred, they would immediately shoot him. Yang Guo had killed too many of their brothers. Not to mention Leader Mo, there were still a few people with bloodshot eyes. They were holding their guns so tightly that their veins were bulging. It must be because they had not received the money yet. They would never let Yang Guo go. This seemed to be a dead end. Poplar Fruit really hoped that there was a cliff behind him. If he jumped down, there was still a glimmer of hope that he could escape death. However, there was no place for him to escape or find a place to hide. Poplar Fruit seemed to have no choice but to die. What are you waiting for? Smoke Ghost said darkly. Are you trying to stall for time? Do you have any reinforcements? His words seemed to be reminding Sun Feng and the others, but also seemed to have a deeper meaning. Sun Feng and the others were immediately stunned. Some people began to look left and right, feeling as if there were eyes staring at them in this place. They felt quite uncomfortable. There were even some people who had escaped from the dictatorship in their country who had a tendency to become irritable. Hurry up and call. Sun Feng shouted impatiently. He removed the safety of his gun and moved the barrel from Poplar Fruit's head to Kiki's head in his arms. Okay, I'll call. Since Kiki was threatened, Poplar Fruit had no choice but to hurriedly pick up his phone with a pleading look and press the number that he had agreed to with the command center. Kneel down and call. Leader Mo suddenly said in a hoarse voice as if he had heard someone's instructions. Poplar Fruit secretly clenched his fists while holding Kiki's hand, but then he let go helplessly. If Kiki was not in his arms, Poplar Fruit would rather fight with them than be humiliated by them. However, for his daughter, Poplar Fruit could only lower his head. Without hesitation, he took a step back and knelt down on one knee. Kneel down. Leader Mo shouted in a hoarse voice. Obviously, he was not satisfied. Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and put down his other injured leg. The moment his knee touched the ground, Poplar Fruit took a deep breath. The wound that was originally painful now because of the tightness of his muscles, but it was torn open again. The blood was like a slow river, slowly dyeing the ground below his knee red. Young Chieftain Mo looked around proudly, as if he had won a round. Even the smoking addict, who seemed to be indifferent to the situation, was secretly happy. Poplar Fruit was a thorn in his side. Before he could get rid of his old grudge, a new one came. His original plan of kidnapping and escaping was completely disrupted by Poplar Fruit. Fortunately, the smoking addict still had a trick up his sleeve. Poplar Fruit slightly turned his body so that he could use his other leg to support himself. Kiki was still in his strong arms. Even though he was kneeling, Poplar Fruit was unwilling to let go of his daughter's hand. The little girl seemed to have a serious fever. Her lips were chapped, her face was pale, and she had fainted again. He was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. He could only continue to deal with them. "I'll give you 10 minutes. I want to see the money in the account." Seeing that Poplar Fruit finally listened to him and made the call, Sun Feng lowered the muzzle of his gun in satisfaction. However, he still threatened him. The call went through, but soon, a series of gunshots disrupted everyone's mood. The gunshots came from the direction of the few people who were on the lookout. Suddenly, everyone was shocked. Some of them aimed their guns at Poplar Fruit and were about to shoot. Some of them were alert and pointed their guns at the outside, but it was a mess. "What's going on?" He Wenjue, who was high up, also became nervous. He thought that Yang Jingdong had made a mistake. He was about to call Meng Sanhua to rescue him. However, at that moment, there was the sound of an elephant. It was a little far away, but they could hear it clearly. It was just like what Poplar Fruit and the others encountered when they were exploring the forest. "It's okay, it's okay." There were a few calls from the lookout. The smoking addict and Sun Feng were relieved when they heard the voices of the people they sent out. It turned out that they saw the trees in front of them rustling in the wind. They nervously thought that the Chinese military and police were coming, so they fired 2 shots. Later, they found out that it was an elephant. It was a false alarm. However, Poplar Fruit's phone was thrown on the ground because he wanted to turn around and hug Kiki. The call was naturally hung up. "Brother Feng, look." A small leader was so nervous that he almost ran away. He looked at Sun Feng and asked in fear. Sun Feng finally realized that something was wrong. Fortunately, it was just a false alarm. If there were really Chinese troops or Burmese warlords sneaking up on them, they would be caught off guard even if they had the wind. Outside the factory, there was no place to take cover. If the gunfire came, all 20 of them would probably die here. Although the factory was not necessarily good, at least it was a relatively safe place. Relying on the terrain they were familiar with, Sun Feng felt that even if there were 100 people, they still had a chance of winning. He was overthinking it. However, Sun Feng was a little hesitant because he always felt that the smoking addict would not be so easily taken over by him. The smoking addict's reputation as a leader was not undeserved. In the end, Sun Feng waved his hand and said, "Let's go. We'll talk when we get back inside. Song San, come and get the money." A group of people surrounded Song San, who was holding the money, and Poplar Fruit, who was staggering, as they slowly walked into the factory. It was just the smoking addict. Just one person, how big of a storm could he cause? Sun Feng really did not believe that the smoking addict would kill him if he was constantly on guard against him. In terms of combat power, Sun Feng, who had joined the Ping family army before, was considered one of the best among them. Poplar Fruit picked up the phone that was of good quality and did not break. He slowly walked towards the factory. Although he was staggering and seemed to be weak from losing a lot of blood, in reality, Poplar Fruit was still able to gather his strength. Therefore, he had been paying attention to his surroundings. If there was no chance, he had to create one. Actually, Yang Jingdong, who had only assassinated 2 people, was also shocked when the gunshots rang out. He thought that he had made a mistake and exposed himself, so he had already picked up the pistol at his waist and looked for cover before he prepared to fight to the death. However, that was not the case. Yang Jingdong quietly asked He Wenjue what to do. "Continue. Use the suppressor and kill the ones who are alone first," He Wenjue said joyfully. Perhaps there would be more opportunities when they reached the factory. Yang Jingdong switched to the more familiar suppressor pistol and fired left and right. He did not give the enemy any time to react and killed the remaining 4 criminals who were on the lookout. He quickly returned to his previous position and took back the Barrett. He was going to switch places with Yiwenjue upstairs. Meng Sanhua quietly followed behind the crowd, using cover to move forward. Yiwenjue, who was upstairs, also held the German G36K on his back in front of him. He had exchanged this gun with a German Special Forces soldier when he participated in the International Special Forces competition. It was time to let them have a taste of our anger. Chapter 1383. Walking in the crowd, Poplar Fruit and the cigarette addict's eyes kept darting around. Hidden behind their expressions, they were deep in thought. Of course, the main character and the supporting character were different. Poplar Fruit was calm and steady. Even though his right leg was injured, he still looked determined. The cigarette addict, on the other hand, was much more cunning. His triangular eyes swept left and right, making him look particularly wretched. In fact, there were not many gunmen left. Poplar Fruit counted in his heart. Excluding the 6 who went to keep watch, there were only 25 gunmen left. After returning to the factory, perhaps because they were back in their own territory, they felt more at ease. Under Sun Fang's command, these people spread out. 5 of them went up to the 2nd floor and looked down, filling the positions of the people that Poplar Fruit had assassinated. These 5 people were Sun Fang's trusted subordinates. With them watching from above, Sun Feng was not worried that the cigarette addict would cause any trouble. Poplar Fruit was about to make a call again. However, the cigarette addict laughed and suddenly interrupted. I'm going to take a piss. Suddenly, Sun Feng became alert. He looked at the cigarette addict deeply and pointed at a pillar next to him. There, you can take a piss there. Anyway, we won't be staying here after today. Of course, some people laughed, while others wanted to laugh but did not dare. Although the cigarette addict had lost his power, his ruthless image was too deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Some of the cowardly underlings did not dare to offend the cigarette addict. Who knew if he would come back and kill them? Just like Ji, who had collapsed in an instant and died with grievances. The cigarette addict was not angry. He looked at Sun Feng with a faint smile and said, "You don't trust me." Sun Feng wanted to be promoted, so he did not want to leave a ruthless side to his subordinates. He laughed and said, "Boss, look at what you're saying. How do I not trust you?" He did not trust him. Our business is more important. Don't ruin everyone's mood because of a piss. Sun Feng said half persuasively and half threateningly, "You've helped us make a fortune, and we're not people who would kick you to the curb after you've outlived your usefulness. Cooperate well, and when the time comes, you want to leave safely with these 2 million, right?" The cigarette addict's eyes flickered, but he smiled and said, "Of course." He turned around and walked towards the pillar. Instead of hiding behind it, he unzipped his pants and peed. When he was done, he whistled contentedly. However, there was a stench in the air. Poplar Fruit's phone call. When the call was connected, he heard Fang Beibei's anxious voice. With tears, she asked, "Uncle, are you hurt? Why did I just heard gunshots?" The call was connected for a short while. Because it was on speakerphone, the command center heard the gunshots from afar. Hearing Fang Beibei's voice, Kiki struggled in Poplar Fruit's arms. The little girl was still having nightmares due to her high fever. Fortunately, she did not have any convulsions, so her fever was not too serious. She murmured weakly, "Mama Ma." Poplar Fruit did not have the chance to let Kiki and Fang Beibei talk. Sun Feng looked at him threateningly, telling him to stop talking nonsense and transfer the money. "Don't worry." Poplar Fruit's voice was not as cold as before. It was much gentler. He said through the phone, "Kiki and I are fine. We're not hurt. Don't worry, we'll go back safely." It was better not to tell Fong Bebe that he was shot. She was already worried sick about him. He paused and looked at Sun Fong, who was frowning. He did not want to talk to Fong Bebe anymore. He said, "Is Yujia there?" "Yes." Xing Yujia answered succinctly. However, from her voice, Poplar Fruit could hear exhaustion and worry. She did not cry like Fong Bebe, but her emotions were the same. In order to stay calm and suppress her emotional breakdown, she had used up too much of her energy. Get someone to pay the ransom. Only pay the ransom to the following accounts. Send it to the account immediately, Poplar Fruit said succinctly. Finally, he paused. Thank you. He owed Jing Yujia too much. It was so much that Poplar Fruit could not repay it with just a few words. However, Poplar Fruit's 2 words of thanks was more than any kind of gratitude to Jing Yujia. She almost could not hold back her tears. She said with a nasal voice, "Don't worry, I'll inform them now." She could not help but add in a proud tone, "I don't need you to thank me. It's fine as long as you come back alive." Poplar Fruit gently nodded. The phone was snatched away by Sun Fong. He shouted to the other side, "I'll give you 10 minutes. No, 20 minutes. If I don't see the money in my account, I'll just wait to collect their corpses." With that, Sun Fong did not wait for the other side to answer and hung up the phone. Poplar Fruit was a little anxious. He looked at Sun Fong angrily. He knew that by doing this, Fong Bebe and the others would fall into panic and worry again. But soon, he withdrew his gaze and calmed down. Now was not the time to be sentimental. He had to think of a way to escape from this predicament. Sun Fong put Poplar Fruit's phone into his pocket and waved his hand lazily. One of the minions ran to find a chair for him. "TSK, TSK. Sun Fong, no, I'll have to call you team leader in the future." The smoking addict cupped his hands and smiled. "You guys have earned a lot after this." Sun Fong crossed his legs, shook them, and waved his hand proudly. He looked at the 2 team leaders who were checking the 5 accounts with their phones and said casually, "It's a good thing that we can earn money together. Boss, you're not bad either. 2 million, and I won't pursue the money from before. It's enough for you to spend for the rest of your life." I didn't have much money in the past. Compared to you guys, I'm far from it." The smoking addict squinted his eyes and smiled. "It's a blessing in disguise. Now, we have less than 30 people, and we can get a lot of money." Sun Fong smiled and didn't answer. However, the minions who didn't know how evil the new team leader was felt excited again. Team leader Mo stood behind Sun Fong and glanced coldly at Poplar Fruit, who was standing on the side. He didn't discuss anything with Sun Fong, but they both knew what to do next. Sun Fong would let Poplar Fruit go to show that he was a man of his words, but team leader Mo wouldn't agree to let Poplar Fruit go back alive. As long as Poplar Fruit walked out of the factory, he would be hunted to death. This was the tacit understanding between him and Sun Fong. Time ticked by, but the money didn't seem to have arrived. Sun Fong couldn't sit still and walked around anxiously. Suddenly, the iron gate outside the factory was slammed open, and an angry elephant's cry echoed throughout the valley. Ran. Kiki, who was frowning in her father's arms, suddenly grabbed her father's clothes and murmured. Chapter 1384. The factory was fine. Why did an elephant come in? Hearing the elephant's cry, everyone was a little confused. With the collision just now, everyone was nervous, thinking that some truck or armored vehicle had crashed in. It was so loud. In the end, it was an elephant. But what were the people on the lookout doing outside? They had scared it away by shooting just now. Why did they let it in? Sun Fang's expression was gloomy. He felt that the people he sent out were really useless. They were so stupid. You guys. Go and kill this beast for me. Don't hinder our important matters. Sun Feng waved his hand and said fiercely. Although he was not an expert, he roughly knew that when wild elephants went crazy, it was usually because they had been violated, or their children had been captured. But this had nothing to do with them. Moreover, with a gun in hand, where on earth would they not be able to do anything? Why would they be afraid of this animal that was only made of flesh and blood? They were waiting for money and feeling annoyed. This kind of unreasonable guy, it was better to kill to his heart's content. Sun Feng pointed his finger at the two gunmen. In fact, he was cursing in his heart. He was cursing those useless fellows. They could not even stop an elephant and brought so much trouble to them. Of course, if they knew that those fellows had died on the hillside, they probably would not be so relaxed. The two gunmen walked out of the factory lazily as if they were taking a stroll. However, just as they took a big step out, the two of them flew back as if they had been hit by a truck that weighed several tons. They fell heavily on the ground a few meters away and wailed in pain. Everyone was dumbfounded. They saw a huge body crash into the door of the factory. How could it be so fast? The two gunmen had just walked out of the factory when they were hit by the ferocious elephant that rushed over. Thinking about a professional football player who was fully equipped colliding head-on with a 2-year-old child who had just learned to walk, one could guess the effect of this collision on the two skinny gunmen. They did not die, but countless bones in their bodies were broken. They could only howl on the ground and could not even get up. The door was actually tightly shut. Usually, they would rely on the 3-meter-tall door to enter and exit. It was enough for humans, but for an Asian elephant that was 5 to 6 meters tall, it was not high enough or big enough. The elephant couldn't do it again. It took 2 steps back and crashed into the door again. However, it couldn't shake the iron door. It cried out angrily and irritably again. Ran. The little girl in Poplar Fruit's arms trembled again. She grabbed her father's clothes and struggled to open her tired and listless eyes. But Poplar Fruit didn't have time to care about the meaning in his daughter's weak voice, because the opportunity had come. Sun Feng was shocked and angry when he saw 2 of his men being hit by an elephant. After he reacted, he waved his hand angrily and roared, "Shoot! Open fire! Kill it for me!" He took the lead and fired a shot, but the bullet missed its target and hit the iron door, causing sparks to fly. Almost everyone turned their guns and fired wildly at the elephant outside the door. Their marksmanship was poor, and many bullets hit the iron door or the wall. However, a few bullets did pass through the open door and hit the elephant's thick skin. Blood and sparks flew at the same time. Although only a thigh was exposed to everyone, the elephant was, after all, an animal made of flesh and blood. The bullets did not penetrate too deep into its body. However, with more than a dozen bullets hitting its body, the tearing pain caused the elephant to be unable to stand firm and fall to the ground with a loud bang. Roar! The elephant's mournful cries came one after another. Within those cries, there was pain, as well as deep helplessness and struggle. However, at this time, almost all the criminals' attention was on the invading elephant at the door, including the few upstairs. Poplar Fruit immediately sensed an opportunity. He looked around and didn't see the smoking ghost, but he couldn't care less. He hugged Kiki and ran out like a cheetah. Before he turned around, he took a deep look at the elephant lying on the ground and wailing. Its body was still bursting with new bloody holes. It seemed that Sun Feng and the rest had no intention of stopping. He said silently in his heart, "I'm sorry. You might really be Ran, but I have to save Kiki first." Okay. The wound on his right leg must have split open. The bloody hole where the bullet bit started to bleed again. When Poplar Fruit took the first step, he felt weak. He had been bleeding for half an hour. Moreover, the pain from the wound on his right leg felt like a knife was stabbing his heart. However, Poplar Fruit bit his lower lip. His slightly pale face was very determined. He endured the pain and ran back with his daughter as fast as he could in a 100-meter race. Did no one notice Poplar Fruit sneaking away? Yes. Young team leader Mo noticed it. Because of his hatred, he focused almost all his attention on Poplar Fruit. Even though he was distracted by the elephant, he didn't shoot at the elephant like the others. Sneaking away. Young team leader Mo grinned like a hunter who had found a fox. His blood-red mouth gritted his teeth, full of bloodthirst and brutality. Young team leader Mo raised his gun and pointed it at Poplar Fruit, who was holding Kiki and rushing to a bunker dozens of meters away. "If I kill you now, Sun Feng can't blame me, right? Who told you to run?" GGA. Bang! The gunshot sounded, but it didn't cover the noisy gunshots of Sun Feng and the rest. However, the sound of a human body heavily smashing onto the ground was noticed by everyone. Of course, someone suddenly fell to the ground behind them. How could they not notice it? Sun Feng and the rest turned around and were shocked to find young team leader Mo dead on the ground. There was a big black hole in his forehead. Not to mention whether he died with his eyes open or not, half of his head was gone. Yes, young Jingdong, who had been lurking on the roof for a long time, finally made his move. The power of his barret directly silenced young team leader Mo, who was about to shoot from the back before he could open fire. Someone panicked and checked who fired the shot, while Sun Feng stared at the fleeing Poplar Fruit. Ah! He angrily raised the AK hanging on his body and fired at Poplar Fruit without caring whether the money was in his account or not. At this moment, Poplar Fruit's adrenaline was surging and his hair stood on end. He knew that danger was coming, but what made him despair was that the space on this floor was too big, too big. He was actually more than 10 meters away from the next bunker. There was no way he could make it in time. Poplar Fruit almost subconsciously rolled on the ground and dodged toward the eye-shaped pillar that was less than 30 centimeters wide. Da-da-da. Sun Feng's AK fired, and more than 10 people around him also raised their rifles. There were too many targets. As a sniper, Yang Jingdong didn't know who to shoot first. Chapter 1385. Da-da-da. The muzzle of the gun lit up Sun Feng's face. The blood vessels in his eyes were unusually bloodthirsty. He was furious, furious. Poplar Fruit wanted to escape secretly and even caused the death of his good friend, young leader Mo Sun Feng, who was infuriated, did not care about money. He wanted to kill the uncooperative Poplar Fruit first. Poplar Fruit had indeed hidden his body behind the eye-shaped iron frame. He lowered his head and wrapped Kiki in it. However, the eye-shaped iron frame was less than 30 centimeters wide. It was not even as wide as Poplar Fruit's hand. It was rusty and could not be used as a perfect cover. Bang bang. The bullets hit the iron frame and made a sound of impact. More bullets rained down on the surrounding ground. Oh, oh. Poplar Fruit's body shook violently. His arms, his left leg that could not be retracted in time, and even his back. Poplar Fruit did not know how many bullets had hit him. He almost curled up and used his whole body to wrap Kiki tightly, blocking all the bullets that could threaten his daughter. He had lost his sense of pain. He felt salty in his mouth. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Perhaps his internal organs were injured. The inner strength in his body was running wildly, but it was useless. It was as if the entire city was on fire. There were only a few firefighting teams. No matter how strong they were, they could not put out the raging fire. Although Poplar Fruit was shot continuously, his consciousness was very clear. Am I going to die here? I feel my life ebbing away. Kiki should be fine. It doesn't matter if I die. Big Brother and the others must save Kiki. However, there were not many bullets that hit Poplar Fruit, only 2 or 3. The rest of the people's attention was attracted by Hewenjua, who fell from the sky. They moved almost simultaneously with Yang Jingdong's sniper rifle. Meng Sanhua, who had been lying in ambush on the second floor, punched and kicked. Occasionally, he would raise the rifle hanging around his neck and fire a few shots. He was killing the few criminals on the second floor who were using the terrain to their advantage. Hewenjua, on the other hand, was hanging on a rope. Like Spider-Man, he ran down from the top of the building. The short muzzle of the G-36K kept spitting out flames. Although Hewenjua was running down the stairs as if he was jumping off a building, his gun was steady. He fired 3 shots in a row, and almost every time he fired, he was able to accurately reap the life of a criminal. Before Hewenjua even reached the ground floor, he had already mowed down 4 or 5 criminals like he was reaping wheat. More than 10 criminals had hurriedly fired at him, but they had only hit his back. Hewenjua had no choice but to hide behind cover under the suppressive fire. There were still a dozen of them standing, and Meng Sanhua had not finished cleaning up the people upstairs. But soon, Yang Jingdong taught them a lesson. With a gunshot, the head of one of the men beside Sun Feng exploded. Sun Feng was stunned for a moment. His head felt cold and he subconsciously squatted down. Just as he squatted down, he heard a faint muffled gunshot. Just now, a big hole had appeared in the chest of one of his brothers behind him. Hide! Hide first! Sun Feng screamed at the top of his lungs. Under the cover of his brothers, they shot while looking for cover to hide. Of course, during this process, Yang Jingdong hit another 2 people. Now, Sun Feng only had 8 men with him on the first floor. Because they had found cover and Yang Jingdong had lost his angle, he stopped shooting. Hugging his sniper rifle, he stood up and prepared to change to another crouch. Although Yang Jingdong, the sword of Damocles, was hanging over their heads, these criminals were not afraid of death. They kept poking their heads out in 2s and 3s, exchanging fire with Hewenjua with their AKs. Hewenjua only popped out and fired 2 shots before retreating in a sorry state. So fierce. Hewenjua grimaced. It was indeed a little difficult for 3 people to fight against 20 people, not to mention that these criminals used to be warlords. Those who were still alive had received military training. 2 criminals were still exchanging fire with Meng Sanhua upstairs, but they could not help suppress Meng Sanhua. With Meng Sanhua's agility and rich combat experience, they were no match for him at all. Meng Sanhua crouched down to dodge the enemy's fire, and then poked his head out to suppress the enemy. Before the enemy could come out from behind the pillar to suppress him again, Meng Sanhua threw away his gun and jumped. Meng Sanhua used the basic skills of Tan Tue to jump onto the railing of the corridor as if he were parkour. He ran 2 steps forward steadily. Then, he spread his arms and grabbed the edge of the railing with his gloved hand, and swung out like Mount Tai. Ha! Meng Sanhua exerted force in his dantian and shouted, jumping behind the 2 bandits. Although they saw it, they couldn't react in time. Moreover, they were caught off guard, and it was difficult for them to use their spears at close range. They turned around to face Meng Sanhua, and only had time to glare at him. If a glare could kill someone, then there wouldn't be any human beings in this world. Meng Sanhua pulled a dagger similar to Yang Jingdong's at his waist and slit the throat of one of the bandits with a cold glint. Then, with a backhand movement, he nailed the dagger into the head of the remaining bandit. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The first one was still clutching his throat that was spurting blood, hissing and not dying completely, but the second one had already died with his eyes wide open. This was the difference between their skills. Meng Sanhua's movements were much cleaner than Yang Jingdong's. He did not deliberately show off his skills, nor did he use Tan Tue or other kung fu skills. He only used his dagger moves. Meng Sanhua did not have the time to pull out his dagger. He picked up the AK from the bodies and was about to help Wenjua suppress the guys on the first floor. However, who would have thought that after 2 shots, the AK's bullets would malfunction? Trash gun! Meng Sanhua cursed. He ran back to pick up his gun and continued suppressing the enemy. This time, Sun Feng and his men could not even raise their heads when they fired at the same time from the first and second floor. Wenjua poked half his body out from cover and fired. His eyes were calm as he stared at a wooden cabinet that had a head poking out from behind it. Click. He changed the magazine and switched the 3-shot to automatic mode. The crosshair and the scope aimed at a certain angle. Tat 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 tat. The gunshots did not stop, and the wooden cabinet splintered. Although it was easy for the barrel of an automatic rifle to deviate after firing for a long time, Wenjua was able to accurately hit the same small circle with a firing rate of 750 rounds per minute under the steady control of his hands. In less than 3 seconds, the wooden cabinet was pierced through. Almost as soon as the gunshot stopped, a criminal fell to the ground. Chapter 1386. In an unknown basement of the factory, there were 3 men sitting in front of the screen, grinning eerily. Let's fight. Let's fight. It's best if we kill them all. The person who spoke was the smoker, who had disappeared without a trace. Sitting beside him was 5 big wolves, who were supposed to be hiding in Kaiyun and acting as a secret contact. 5 big wolves wrapped his fist with bandages and licked his lips with his scarlet tongue. He looked at the agile Meng Sanhua on the screen, his eyes shining like a hunter who had seen a rabbit. The other one was indeed a middle-aged man with glasses and a mushroom hairstyle. His hand was rubbing a row of red buttons on the side from time to time. His expression was particularly wretched, as if it was not a button, but a hot bikini beauty. Mushroom Chen. 5 big wolves slapped the back of his head and said, "Give the button to the boss." "Is this something you can touch? Wasn't I the one who made this?" Mushroom Chen mumbled, but obediently moved the button to the smoking addict. Mushroom Chen and 5 big wolves were the smoking addict's most trusted subordinates. 5 big wolves was very skilled. When he was a supervisor in the mining area, he accidentally helped an old man and learned a few moves of Shaolin Vajra fist. What really made him improve was after he followed the smoking addict. The smoking addict gave him the Muay Thai secret manual of his former boss, which made 5 big wolves much stronger. Of course, 5 big wolves did not know how strong he was. There was no market for black market Muay Thai around, so there were no experts. In the stockade, everyone was thin and weak, so there was no challenge. The smoking addict also asked him to hide his strength. Naturally, he felt that he could dominate the world, but he really did not take a step forward. As for Mushroom Chin, he was an expert. Of course, it was not because of his skills. His skill was in his head. Mushroom Chen's nickname came from his hairstyle. Mushrooms were his favorite type of weather. How cool would it be to light a fire and see a mushroom cloud? In the past, the smoking addict had met him and knew that he was a lunatic with a high IQ. After he became the boss, he called the smoking addict and asked him to secretly make some toys for him. The method of controlling Mushroom Chin was also very simple and crude. The smoker first made him addicted to the drug, then used the drug to keep him hanging. Mushroom Chin was dead set on following him. The smoker glanced at the button in front of him but didn't care. Instead, he stared at the screen. They did not buy many cameras, and the quality was poor. They could not see the whole scene. For example, the camera on the second floor had captured the fight between Meng Sanhua and Sun Fang's men. But after Meng Sanhua fired from a different spot, they could not see it. Even if there was a wide-angle camera above the empty ground on the first floor, it would only be able to see gunfire from both sides. The people were either hiding behind cover or crawling into the room to shoot from the windows. It was impossible to see anyone at all. It was all guesswork, but it had to be said that imagination was very interesting. Mushroom Chin saw a black object being thrown out from He Wenjua's side. Before he could make a fuss, a flame flashed on the screen. The place where Sun Feng and the others were hiding just now exploded. All kinds of black pieces flew everywhere, like snow that filled the sky. It was easy to imagine what happened to the people inside. Oh! Oh! Grenade! There's even a grenade. Hee hee, I like it. Mushroom Chin shouted as he danced around. The firepower is so strong. The 5 wolves were also shocked. Luckily, they were in the basement and not in that position. Otherwise, they would have been shaken by the shockwave of the grenade. Sun Feng should be dead. The smoking addict stared at the screen and narrowed his eyes. It was hard to tell if he was excited or regretful, or maybe both. Back upstairs, although He Wenjua had killed a criminal with a penetrating shot, Sun Feng and the others were not stupid. They all moved behind thicker cover and began to counterattack with even more ferocious firepower. He Wenjua and Meng Sanhua felt a lot of pressure from twice the number of gunmen firing at the same time. Meng Sanhua, who was in the corridor upstairs, could not use the railings as cover. He could only retreat and hide in the room under the pressure of the bullets. Meng Sanhua could not rush out and was anxious. He glanced at the 4 scattered corpses in the room from the corner of his eye and grimaced. He did not know, but he could guess that the person at the door had a hole as big as his neck. It was probably the mark of Poplar Fruit's Miaodao. This was the result of Poplar Fruit's infiltration. The 4 people from Guogan gang were silently killed by Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was able to catch his breath at this moment because the firepower on him was focused on Big Brother He and the others. Of course, it was very difficult for him to catch his breath. Poplar Fruit raised his head with difficulty, but felt waves of dizziness and tearing pain. It was not the kind of dizziness that came from squatting for too long, but the kind of dizziness that came from too much blood loss. How many shots had he been shot? Poplar Fruit was still very conscious. Although he could not count how many shots there were definitely no less than 5 bullets in his body. Most of them were his limbs. Then, there was a more troublesome one that entered his body from the back. Although he had subconsciously contracted his muscles and did not bite deeply, the bullet still went in. Who knew if it had damaged his internal organs? Blood flowed like a river under him. Only Poplar Fruit's profound internal energy could keep him from fainting. If it were anyone else, they would have been unable to move. Even the slightest movement was fatal. Poplar Fruit moved his arms slightly. Both his left and right muscles were in severe pain because the bullets had pierced his upper arms. Now, don't talk about exerting strength, even a slight movement would cause him great pain. Not to mention his legs. His right leg was injured in the front, but his left leg was too slow when he was dodging, so he was shot twice. Now, poplar fruit could almost be said to have lost the ability to move. Fortunately, the other party's weapons were all obsolete goods from the Burmese military, possibly from World War II. The lethality of the bullets was far less than He Wenjua's weapons. Otherwise, even if poplar fruit had several lives, it would not be enough to kill him. But poplar fruit still gritted his teeth and circulated his internal energy to all parts of his body, supporting the injured parts. Poplar fruit even used his internal energy to temporarily cut off, or rather, to obscure the pain he felt. Then, he reluctantly closed his hands, hugged Kiki, and stood up shakily. Of course, this was not a good idea. Because temporarily obscuring the pain, it also obscured the brain's control of his limbs. Poplar fruit was almost like a walking zombie, his movements were all uncoordinated. Poplar fruit. He Wenjua saw poplar fruit stand up and was pleasantly surprised. Just now, he thought that poplar fruit was going to be shot to death. But he immediately shouted, "Get down!" Before he could finish his sentence, He Wenjua threw a frag grenade at Yang Jingdong, who had taken out a player with a sniper rifle upstairs, because he had been frightened by Yang Jingdong's sniper rifle. Chapter 1387. He Wenjua threw out an offensive grenade. Of course, it was not a domestic product, and it was also the only grenade they had brought with them this time. To be honest, He Wenjua did not plan to bring a grenade from the beginning. After all, it was not very useful in the rescue of the hostages. Bombs, grenades, and even missiles could only be used in American movies. In reality, by the time they used grenades to fight with the enemy, the hostages would most likely be dead. But after considering that there might be opponents like terrorists, He Wenjua still brought one just to be safe. He did not expect that although they were not terrorists, the firepower of these ragged Burmese dogs would be so strong. He could not break through the situation for a while, and he was worried about poplar fruit's safety. He Wenjua could only throw out the grenade in his hand. The effect was surprisingly good. Poplar fruit was not affected much by the explosion of the grenade, he just staggered and fell from the impact. As for Sun Fong and the other criminals, most of them were behind the solid rock bunker with Sun Fong and were directly blown to pieces by the grenade. Including Sun Fong, he was also directly blasted to death. There were still 2 criminals who did not die. They hid in the room and secretly fired their guns. They escaped this disaster, but their courage was scared out of their wits. The opponent had already used such a powerful weapon like a grenade. Could they still continue fighting? If there was another grenade, they would have nowhere to hide in the room. Thus, the second wave of the grenade's effect was achieved. All the resistance and gunshots stopped. The 2 criminals in the room directly threw out the guns in their hands and shouted, we surrender, don't shoot." They spoke in Chinese. Although it was a little awkward, because they were only Chinese, they could still hear it clearly. 2 people walked out with their heads lowered in frustration. This time, it was He Wenjua's turn to be in a difficult position. Surrender. How could they surrender? Surrender meant that there would be captives. If they were in China, they could be handed over to the police, but this was overseas. Leaving a captive alive was equivalent to leaving a live witness for others to use against them. If someone investigated and found out that He Wenjua and the others had snuck into their country, they would be court-martialed. He Wenjua's figure slowly walked out of the bunker, but he didn't put down the gun in his hand. His expression flickered, as if he was thinking about something. Meng Sanhua and Yang Jingdong also stopped firing. They held their guns and waited for He Wenjua's order. In the mysterious basement, the smoker was discussing something with Mushroom Chin. "Are you sure these guys can be covered?" the smoker asked as he pointed at the people standing in the factory. Of course, not everyone could see it. For example, those upstairs could only see half a hand or a head. No problem. Mushroom Chin was very confident in his masterpiece. He said, the explosion might not be able to kill them, but even if they don't die, they're close. Anyway, they can't run away. Those who don't die from the explosion will be burned to death by the fire. Then what about my money? The smoker asked as he pointed at the 2 million yuan in cash in the middle of the screen. Boss, as long as you don't press this button, it won't explode. Mushroom Chin pointed at the button in the middle and promised, Boss, don't worry. I installed all the gasoline and explosives here. I've already taken the coverage into consideration. As long as this doesn't explode, there won't be a problem. But what? The smoker asked unhappily. If you don't explode this, he won't be hit. Mushroom Chin looked at the smoker with fear. The person he was talking about was the poplar fruit that the smoker wanted to get rid of the most. The smoker had painstakingly planned so many things for the poplar fruit, including the last trump card that Mushroom Chin secretly buried but didn't use easily. Mushroom Chin was worried that his sinister boss, the smoker, would take his anger out on him. The smoker glanced at him and said, He's fine. I'll take care of him myself later. But I can't let anything happen to my money. Although Sun Feng and the rest were dead, he couldn't get the 100 million yuan because he didn't have the password. The remaining 2 million yuan was the key to whether he could live comfortably for the rest of his life. Of course, it wasn't in China. If he were to do business comfortably in a small peaceful country in Southeast Asia, 2 million yuan would be enough to spend. Mushroom Chin nodded vigorously and chuckled. Boss, don't worry. We'll go out later and leave with the money in 10 minutes. The bomb won't explode during that time. Of course, after 10 minutes, I can't say for sure when the fire starts. In the field, Poplar Fruit struggled to get up again. He wasn't injured this time, but the wounds on his body had opened up again. His clothes were soaked with blood, and he was about to turn into a bloody man. Third brother, come down quickly. Bandage Poplar Fruit's wounds. Wenjua saw it and realized that Poplar Fruit was seriously injured. He didn't have time to think about how to deal with these captives. He shouted for Meng Sanhua through his earpiece. Right away. Brother Dong, throw the med kit down. Meng Sanhua jumped onto the railing. He was too lazy to go downstairs. He wanted to jump down from the second floor. This should have been a piece of cake from Meng Sanhua, but at that moment, the smoker pressed the button. Boom! Wenjua heard a loud bang. In the room behind him, gasoline and explosives exploded. Even though he was far away, the violent shockwave and debris sent Wenjua flying. He landed heavily on the ground, uncertain if he was still alive. At the same time, there were 2 more explosions. Several rooms on the first floor exploded at the same time. The 2 surrendering criminals who had just walked out of their rooms were instantly engulfed in a sea of fire. The violent shaking shook Meng Sanhua, who was standing on the railing, off the railing. This allowed him to escape the fatal blow of the explosives on the second floor. Because as the explosives exploded, the roiling flames instantly engulfed the corridor on the second floor. Of course, Meng Sanhua, who was in midair, was also thrown out by the shockwave. He fell to the ground in a parabola and fainted without making a sound. The explosives did not manage to blow up Poplar Fruit and the 2 million yuan in cash in the middle. But Mushroom Chin had forgotten about the shockwave caused by the explosion. Yanghua, who had just stood up not long ago, was a bit dizzy due to excessive blood loss. His premonition of danger didn't allow him to react in time. The ferocious shockwave sent him crashing down for the second time. This time, it was much more serious than the previous grenade. Poplar Fruit unfortunately rolled on the ground for 2 rounds. He could only rely on his own body to protect Kiki. But this time, a lot of rubble pierced his wounds. It was as if salt had been sprinkled on his wounds. The pain was so painful that Poplar Fruit almost fainted. It was the same for the cash. The 2 suitcases were still fine after tumbling a few times. However, the luggage bag that was already unzipped was sent flying by the shockwave. In an instant, the air was filled with grandpa notes. Most of them were engulfed by the flames. Chapter 1388. The 3rd floor was the last to explode. Although Yang Jingdong was prepared in a hurry, he was still unavoidably sent flying from the 2nd floor by the impact of the explosion. A fall from the 3rd floor wouldn't kill anyone, but Yang Jingdong's bones were probably shattered from the fall. Perhaps because the impact wasn't strong enough, Yang Jingdong didn't faint, but he couldn't stand up after struggling for a while. There was a series of explosions. The power of gasoline mixed with explosives wasn't as strong as TNT, so it couldn't directly blow up the entire factory. However, gasoline had a strong adhesive force. It stuck to the building and burned the entire building. The heat of the flames evaporated the moisture in the rainforest. The air became drier and drier. It looked like the entire factory was going to burn down. Regardless of whether they were killed by the explosion, if they continued to stay, they would definitely be engulfed by the sea of fire. At this moment, Yang Jingdong couldn't move. Meng Sanhua had fainted. He Wenjua was the closest to the explosion and was sent flying. He was also unconscious. The one in the best condition was probably Poplar Fruit, who was shot 5 or 6 times. Poplar Fruit's injuries were getting worse. He was in so much pain that he almost fainted, but he didn't faint. He was still conscious. He looked around and saw the sea of fire in a daze. He knew that the situation was getting worse. He struggled to get up from the ground. His right hand, which was supporting him on the ground, left a blurry bloody handprint on the ground. Poplar Fruit was really trying his best. His body was trembling from the pain and he was bleeding too much. Even with the support of internal energy, his hands and feet were weak. However, his left hand was still holding on to Kiki with strength. Even though she had been humiliated, scolded, shot at, and bombed, the little girl had always been safe and protected in her father's arms. She was almost unharmed. However, Kiki's situation wasn't optimistic. She might have gastritis due to not eating for 2 days. In addition, she was frightened and crying too much. Now, she had a fever and was unconscious. Poplar Fruit even used some internal energy to try to alleviate his daughter's condition. However, internal energy didn't have much effect on fever. Poplar Fruit stood up and struggled to save Big Brother He and the others who were affected by the explosion. Poplar Fruit was having a hard time judging the situation now. The only thing he could think of was to wake up Big Brother He and the others, then support each other and leave this place. Big Brother He and the others were here for him, so he definitely couldn't ignore them. Besides, his body was riddled with injuries. Even if his blood ran dry, he wouldn't be able to walk out of this forest. But Poplar Fruit had only taken 2 steps when the door of a room suddenly opened. Under Poplar Fruit's astonished gaze, a light motorcycle drove out. The motorcycle was not an expensive model. Instead, it was a very light mountain motorcycle that evolved from a bicycle with an auxiliary engine like the Honda Hornet. It was very common on the streets of Southeast Asia. There were 2 people without helmets sitting on the motorcycle. The 5 big wolves were holding the handle. The 5 big wolves who kidnapped Kiki had turned into ashes. Poplar Fruit could recognize his face. And the one sitting behind the motorcycle was the smoker who he had been wondering where he was hiding. Poplar Fruit suddenly understood. It was the smoker. He was the one who controlled the explosion. It wasn't the two people who had just surrendered who deliberately did the stupid thing of dying together. It turned out that he had another person lying in ambush in this factory. No wonder he could disappear without a trace. He was too cunning. However, Poplar Fruit didn't know that there was a basement in this factory. He didn't go underground in his dream. He also didn't know that the 5 big wolves had actually returned to Myanmar behind everyone's back. The person who sent the message to Poplar Fruit was just another person hired by him. What Poplar Fruit didn't know was that the smoker actually had another subordinate. It was just that Mushroom Chin didn't have the chance to appear in front of him again. Mushroom Chin had lost his value, and because the addiction would constantly deplete the smoker's inventory, the smoker took advantage of the anger of having his money burned and shot Mushroom Chin before he left. Therefore, there was only one person left in the basement lying on the table with his head bleeding. The smoker sat on the motorcycle and stopped in the middle of the factory. Next to him were the 2 boxes of money. The smoker got off the motorcycle. He didn't rush to get the money. Instead, he looked at Poplar Fruit with a smug smile. Fuck. Poplar Fruit cursed in his heart. He saw the smoker carry a long green cylinder on his shoulder without saying a word. That was an RPG. Bye-bye. The smoker muttered softly. He seemed to understand that many villains died because they talked too much. He didn't waste any more time talking to Poplar Fruit and pulled the trigger. Goodbye, my not. Poplar Fruit had no chance of dodging. He had been shot too many times, especially in his left and right legs. There was no way he could dodge quickly. Seeing the smoker's action, Poplar Fruit's pupils dilated. His body reacted almost automatically. He removed the support from his legs and fell to the ground with a thud. What was even more dangerous was that just as Poplar Fruit knelt on the ground, the smoker's rocket brushed past his head. The flame at the end of the rocket burned Poplar Fruit's hair instantly. However, this was nothing. The rocket exploded on the wall behind Poplar Fruit. The explosion almost buried Poplar Fruit. This time, Poplar Fruit was seriously injured. A fist-sized rock smashed into his back, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. The smoker was a little disappointed that the rocket didn't directly blow Poplar Fruit into pieces. However, seeing that the rock almost buried Poplar Fruit, he didn't want to walk more than 10 meters to kill Poplar Fruit. At this time, the factory was very dangerous. Who knew if such a big fire would accidentally ignite the gasoline mixture that the unreliable Mushroom Chin said would only explode after 10 minutes? In any case, Poplar Fruit couldn't survive in this sea of fire. The smoker picked up the 2 boxes of money, got on the motorcycle, and hung them on the motorcycle. Then, he patted Wolf Five's shoulder and said, "Little Five, let's go. Don't stay here and die with them." Wolf Five looked at Meng Sanhua regretfully. Meng Sanhua was his imaginary enemy. Who knew that he would be killed by Mushroom's explosives? However, he took the smoker's words as an imperial edict. Without hesitation, Wolf Five twisted the accelerator, started the motorcycle, and drove out of the factory. The motorcycle sped up, just like their happy mood. After they left, the factory would explode again and burn down. Then, all traces of them would be burned away. What would be left would be their carefree plot. However, this was a novel in which Poplar Fruit was the main character. Paw! The speeding motorcycle flew back at an even faster speed. Chapter 1389. Shooting down Poplar Fruit with an RPG, burying the rescue soldiers and Sun Feng's old subordinates in this old factory, and coming out unscathed, tricking nearly 100 people and earning so much money for nothing. When the smoker got on the motorcycle and signaled the 5 wolves to drive out, he was so proud that he felt like he was floating. However, he never thought that he would really be floating. Woo! Woo! The motorcycle sped past the entrance of the factory with a brute force, but a dark brown object as thick as a thigh came crashing down on it. Paw! The roar of the motorcycle's engine came to an abrupt stop. It was like a powerful whip that stopped the 5 wolves and the smoker from getting off the motorcycle. No matter how fast the car was driving, it still flew out at the same speed. It only rolled a few times in the air before plunging into the weeds by the wall. The 2 of them also maintained their original speed, but in the opposite direction. They were sent flying back in the air. At the last moment before they flew back, the 5 wolves tilted their heads and finally saw clearly what that thigh-thick whip was through their frightened eyes. It was a huge elephant lying on the ground. Judging from its size, it was obviously an adult. The whip was the elephant's trunk, which was the most flexible and powerful part of its body. Why is there an elephant here? Before the 5 wolves fainted, they couldn't figure it out. The 5 wolves, who bore the brunt of the attack, were the most seriously injured. Who knew how many of their ribs were broken? They fainted on the ground, bleeding from their mouths and noses. Obviously, their internal injuries were more serious. The elephant's trunk was powerful, and the smoker's driving speed was also very fast. The 2 combined were no less serious than being hit by a 70 km/h car on the road. The smoker, on the other hand, didn't receive much of the impact because the 5 wolves were in front of him. However, he was thrown into the air, lost his balance, and fell heavily on the ground. The smoker, who didn't have a good physique, almost fainted. He groaned for a long time but couldn't get up. The factory fell into silence for a moment. Outside the factory, the elephant that had smacked them with its trunk was not in a good state either. Its trunk seemed to have been fractured and was in a very strange shape. Its left front leg and body were riddled with bullet marks and were badly mutilated. Its body was rubbing against the ground, but it could not stand up again. If Yang Guo or other people who had participated in the recording of the show were here, they would definitely exclaim out loud when they saw its hind legs trying to support itself on the ground. That scar, wasn't it the same as Ran Ran who had said goodbye to the forest 2 days ago? It really was Ran Ran, the one that Kiki had been murmuring in her father's arms. But how did it appear tens of kilometers away in Myanmar? Was it because it found the tracks of the kidnappers after Kiki was kidnapped, so it followed its scent all the way here? But it was just an elephant. No one knew what Ran Ran had experienced in the past 2 days, but it did appear here. Perhaps Poplar Fruit should be grateful to Ran Ran because it had helped him twice. The first time was when it attacked the factory and attracted Sun Fang's attention, giving Poplar Fruit a precious opportunity to escape. The second time was when it dealt a heavy blow to the smokers' group when they were about to escape. Perhaps the smoker couldn't have guessed that Sun Fang's group couldn't even kill an elephant when he escaped in the chaos. However, Poplar Fruit didn't have time to think about being grateful now. Just now, he was almost blasted into pieces by the RPG, but the wall behind him exploded, and the flying rocks smashed into him until he was bleeding from his mouth and nose. Moreover, he and Chi-Chi who was in his arms were buried in a pile of rubble. Damn it! Yang Guo finally recovered. The burning sensation on his back was still intense, but the heaviness in his chest had been dispelled by his internal energy and was slightly alleviated. However, at the very least, Yang Guo didn't faint from the pain. His willpower, at this very moment, almost broke through his own understanding. If it were someone else, they would have died long ago after being shot 5 or 6 times and then bombarded by an RPG. However, Poplar Fruit recovered in the end. He clenched his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. Finally, he endured the pain from every muscle in his body. That's right, Yang Guo was covered in wounds from head to toe. Even though he had been protecting Chi-Chi's left arm all this time, he felt as if his left arm was about to break from the heavy and intimate contact with the floor. However, what really made Poplar Fruit depressed was Kiki's series of coughs. Poplar Fruit had indeed used his body to protect Kiki. Even if she fell, she would fall on his arm. The bullets and rubble were all blocked by Poplar Fruit's broad shoulders and chest. However, Poplar Fruit was unable to stop the flow of air. After the RPG bombardment, not only were the rubble swept up, there was also the choking smoke. This caused the little girl to cough violently. The sound was almost touching Poplar Fruit's chest, and it was transmitted through the blood in his heart to Poplar Fruit's mind. It was like the evening drum and the morning bell, instantly waking up the dizzy Poplar Fruit. No! I have to save Kiki. The pain from the wound and the dizziness caused by excessive blood loss limited Poplar Fruit's ability to think. However, his only goal was still clear. The wound opened up again, right? Moving his fingers, Poplar Fruit endured the intense pain, gritted his teeth, and slowly propped himself up from the rubble. The rubble rolled down and cut through the bloody wound, causing the muscles on Poplar Fruit's face to twitch. Even the students who admired Poplar Fruit the most would not be able to recognize that the man in front of them, who was covered in dust and dirt, was the handsome teacher who once gracefully taught them in class. This was the third time he fell to the ground, and the third time he got up. However, this time, it seemed to have exhausted all the strength in Poplar Fruit's body. He could not help but sit down on the rubble, gasping for breath. Taking advantage of this time, he gently wiped the dust from his daughter's mouth and nose. His daughter was so pitiful. Poplar Fruit did not know what he looked like, but when he saw Kiki's small body, unkempt face, and miserable appearance, Poplar Fruit almost could not hold back his tears. In fact, it seemed like he could not cry. He had lost too much blood, and his body was almost in a state of a lamp without oil. Kiki's little face, which was in a daze from the fever, became thin, and did not have the previous rosy and cute appearance. However, her long eyelashes trembled, and Kiki's eyes slowly opened. They were still bright and watery. Although a little dazed, the moment she saw her father, Kiki's eyes were filled with happiness and joy. Kiki only had her father in her eyes, but Poplar Fruit could see a figure gradually getting up from behind her from the reflection in her eyes. Chapter 1390. Fuck. He's still not dead. The smoker cursed in his heart as he struggled to get up from the ground. Of course, he wasn't talking about himself. He didn't want to die. The smoker was talking about Poplar Fruit, who was also sitting on the rocks when he got up. The smoker couldn't figure out why Poplar Fruit was still alive after being hit by an RPG and rocks. But it didn't matter. It was time to end this. The smoker grinned maliciously. He pulled out his gun from his waist and walked forward step by step. He thought cruelly, I'll kill his daughter first, then kill him. The smoker wanted Poplar Fruit to see his daughter die with his own eyes. However, Poplar Fruit saw him stand up. Kiki didn't notice the smoker standing up, but Poplar Fruit, who had his back facing the smoker, saw everything through his daughter's bright eyes. No! Poplar Fruit stood up abruptly. At that moment, he seemed to have forgotten all the pain in his body. His exhausted body seemed to have regained some strength. Poplar Fruit stood up with his legs, which had been shot 3 times, and pounced on the smoker like a ferocious tiger. Roar! Poplar Fruit's roar stunned the smoker. He was so scared that he almost lost his grip on his gun and was pushed to the ground by Poplar Fruit. Go to hell! Poplar Fruit's roar was so loud that no one could understand what he was saying. However, his murderous intent was transmitted directly into the smoker's mind through his hands that were tightly wrapped around the smoker's neck. The smoker felt like he was being strangled by a machine in a factory. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't break free from Poplar Fruit's grip. The feeling of suffocation brought death to the man's mind. He subconsciously moved his right hand and pressed the gun against Poplar Fruit's chest. The coldness of the gun muzzle could be felt through the layers of clothes, but Poplar Fruit did not notice it. The smell of death, which was very similar to that of the Grim Reaper, had already entered Poplar Fruit's mind through his premonition, but the Poplar Fruit did not notice it. Poplar Fruit's thoughts were in a mess. All he wanted to do was to kill the guy in front of him. This way, he wouldn't be able to hurt his daughter. Go to hell. The smoker pulled the trigger with a desperate murderous intent. Bang! A gunshot rang out. It was as if a dry thunder had pierced through the early morning sky, startling countless birds that had just woken up. The birds flapped their wings and quickly flew away from the forest, leaving behind white feathers that reflected the morning sun. In the factory, Poplar Fruit felt his body tremble. A terrifying feeling of being torn apart acted on his heart. His life was rapidly flowing away like an ebbing tide, and the boundless darkness was like a rising tide that was about to swallow him whole. The last sound he heard was his daughter's heart-wrenching cry behind him. Papa! The last image he saw was of the culprit in front of him. Until now, Poplar Fruit still didn't know his name, but he was smiling. It was a smile that seemed to have escaped his control. My daughter is going to be in danger again. No, I can't let him go. Poplar Fruit's pupils that were about to disperse focused again. His hands that were holding on to the smoker gathered a little strength. With a squeeze of his hands, Poplar Fruit crushed the smoker's neck. Ugh! Poplar Fruit didn't give the smoker a chance to react. He directly cut off his breathing. However, Poplar Fruit had used up the last bit of strength in his body. His eyelids were heavy, and he fell headfirst onto the smoker's body. In the spacious factory, the fire burned fiercely, causing the bricks to crackle loudly. Meanwhile, Chi-Chi's cries as she gradually crawled over to her father's side, Yang Jingdong's pained cries as he slowly woke up and groaned on the ground, and the helpless and disappointed cries of the elephant outside the door became the only sound in the background. The burning factory reflected the morning sky red. The lazy white clouds had already appeared on the horizon, and even the sun couldn't take away their brilliance. However, the sky wasn't the lens of the world. Through the layers of white clouds, one could see a magical illusion of an unknown world. Here, the clouds were solid, and the sun was shining brightly. There were also white cranes flying elegantly in the sky, just like the ones described in books. It was as if he had entered the territory of immortals. Hidden behind a large cloud was a vast expanse of exquisite and glorious palaces. The palaces were filled with colorful flowers, and even the heavenly peaches were as large as basketballs. Everyone was dressed in simple yet elegant clothing, and there were also all kinds of novel spell techniques and skills being practiced. There were no more cries of despair, cries of pain, and the sound of flames in the factory. There was also no more clamor from the people in the palace below. It was as if there was only the sound of ancient music drifting from another space. What was this? Perhaps this was the world after death. Poplar Fruit was dead, and his soul floated to this magical immortal world. Well, he didn't go to hell. Perhaps he came to this beautiful and peaceful immortal world because he cared about his daughter, lover, family, and the world. Perhaps Yang Guo would be able to see her daughter in this place. The end of the book. Wait. Are you kidding me? How could it be the end of the book? The naughty Xiao Han was kicked back to reality by Poplar Fruit. Just as the fire in the factory was getting stronger and stronger, and it was about to fall into a desperate situation, 3 figures suddenly rushed in from the door. The 3 reinforcements from the military of Shu Du had finally arrived. Oh no! Help! Rushing into the burning factory, the leader of the team saw the situation at a glance and shouted loudly. One rushed to Kiki, who was holding her father's hand and crying in the middle. The other captain rushed to Yang Jingdong, who was still breathing. It's Yang Jingdong. In fact, they all knew each other. They had communicated with each other in the Special Forces competition. The captain asked his teammates to set up the support and shouted to Yang Jingdong, "Are you all right? Did you hurt your spine?" "I'm fine. I won't die." Yang Jingdong smiled bitterly and asked the captain to help him up. He must have internal injuries, but he had to endure it at this time. Save Lao He and Lao Meng. They are over there. He Wenjue and Meng Sanhua hadn't woken up yet. On the other side, the Special Forces soldier who wanted to take Kiki out of the fire was in a difficult situation. Kiki was crying and shouting, and she refused to let go of her father's hand. However, it was very dangerous here. No one knew if the whole house would suddenly collapse when the fire started. "Is this your father?" He had to squat down and reach out to touch Poplar Fruit's neck. His face changed. He quickly held Poplar Fruit's shoulder with his right hand and held Kiki with his left hand. He rushed outside in a hurry. This time, it seemed that it knew that they were here to save Kiki. However, it didn't stop them again. Of course, it didn't have the strength to move again. Chapter 1391. Including Xiao Luoka, many fans of Where's Dad? Of course, more fans of Poplar Fruit and Kiki are looking forward to good news. Xiao Luoka stayed up all night and didn't get any new news. Instead, those Weibo Big V's repeatedly fried cold rice and narrated the 4 years of Poplar Fruit and Kiki's bumpy path of growth. Again and again, his tears wetted the pillow towel. If I were in the position of Poplar Fruit, would I be able to raise my daughter as firmly as Poplar Fruit? Maybe I will, no matter how hard it is. I can never abandon or give up, but that's just the values I've cultivated since I was a child. If it were other Chinese people, they would never be able to do what Poplar Fruit did. Of course, he couldn't do it so well himself. After a sleepless night, Xiao Luoka couldn't get up. He struggled to ask his roommates to help him ask for leave. This was unprecedented for a good student, Xiao Luoka. But Xiao Luoka couldn't hold on any longer. He fell down and slept for almost the whole morning. It wasn't until 12:00 at noon when his roommates came back and the dormitory gradually became noisy that he woke up leisurely. "Hey, have you heard? They're all talking about that teacher today. I don't understand why those girls like him so much. I don't think he's as handsome as me." Xiao Luoka heard his roommate's words in a daze, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He didn't know who his roommate was talking about, but he knew that this brother was fat and definitely not handsome. "I don't know that teacher either, but it seems that Xiao Luoka often discusses with those girls. It's like a variety show, right?" Another roommate from Yingjili responded. "Wait a minute." Xiao Luoka's head suddenly sobered up, and he suddenly connected their words. Are they talking about Poplar Fruit? Is there any new news about Kiki now? Xiao Luoka quickly got up from the bed and accidentally knocked his head on the floor. He was tall and couldn't help it. Amidst the concern of his roommates, Xiao Luoka didn't have time to respond to them. He turned on his mobile phone and quickly went online to read the news. He opened the news of Tingsun. The title was, "Kiki successfully rescued, Poplar Fruit seriously injured and sent to hospital." In fact, the photos obtained by Tingsun News were taken by netizens. It's just a group of people pushing a medical stretcher to the military helicopter that had begun to spin. The news quoted Cyan's official communications. Of course, it didn't mention the bizarre and controversial fact that Poplar Fruit had single-handedly gone abroad to rescue his daughter. They only briefly stated two things. Calm, of course. She had a high fever. And, of course, she had a high fever. These were all minor problems. These were all minor problems. She. Of course you. To YS Yingze. As for the process, Kunming officials hadn't given an answer yet. However, this was enough to make the reporters start to daydream. Tingsun News also secretly obtained a piece of news from an informant of the "Where Are You Going, Dad?" program. It was said that Poplar Fruit was on the verge of death when he was sent out. He had been shot more than 20 times. The comments were full of scolding. More than 20 times. Are you kidding me? He's been shot more than 20 times. He's already turned into a sieve. What's the point of going to the hospital? Can't you just send him to be burned? Regardless of whether it was true or not, Xiao Luoka and all the fans of Poplar Fruit and Kiki in the country had their hearts in their mouths when they saw the news from Cyan's official website. Regardless of whether they liked Poplar Fruit or only liked Kiki, none of them wanted Poplar Fruit to die. Kiki, who had just been born as a single-parent child, was already miserable enough. No one wanted to see Kiki become a real orphan. Most of the fans who liked Poplar Fruit couldn't help but cry because a lot of the news was very mysterious. It was as if Poplar Fruit wouldn't be able to survive until he was sent to the operating table. In fact, when Xiao Luoka saw the news, Poplar Fruit had already been sent to Kunming Hospital for emergency treatment. The doctor was busy removing 7 bullets from his body. During this period, Poplar Fruit went into critical shock several times. When the doctor came out with the notice of critical illness for Fong Beibei to sign, Fong Beibei fainted from crying and was sent to Kiki's ward for an intravenous drip. Fong Beibei's body was relatively weak, and she had been in a state of emotional turmoil for the past few days. When she saw the notice of critical illness, she thought that Poplar Fruit was dying. Xing Yujie couldn't hold on either. Like Fong Beibei, she didn't sleep at all. When she saw Poplar Fruit's body, which was full of bloody holes, as if it had been blown up, the two girls cried. When the notice of critical illness was sent out for the second time, Xing Yujie, who was only slightly better, was also sent to the ward for an intravenous drip. Outside the emergency room, Yan Wanxiong, producer Xia, and other relevant people were waiting anxiously. Because it was a cross-border operation, the process of the matter had to be strictly confidential, so producer Xia didn't know the rescue process at all. But Yan Wanxiong knew. He knew that when the 3 special forces of the Shudu military region arrived at the scene, the two sides were almost in a state of mutual destruction. Poplar Fruit, who had been rescued, was brought back to China, while the smoking man and the others were swallowed by the collapsed factory in front of the special forces. He Wenjue and Meng Sanhua were actually fine. Because they were wearing bulletproof vests, they didn't have any serious injuries. They were in a coma because of the serious impact, and some slight concussions. But after being carried to a safe place by the reinforcements, they gradually regained their ability to move. Yang Jingdong, on the other hand, was more seriously injured. He fell from the 3rd floor, and several of his ribs were broken. He also had internal injuries, so he had to be carried back on a stretcher. But the stretcher was given to Poplar Fruit, so he sadly lay on a stretcher made of branches. Needless to say, Poplar Fruit's injuries were the most serious. The smoking man's last shot almost killed Poplar Fruit. From the time they were sent to the hospital until Fong Beibei and Jing Yujie woke up, Poplar Fruit had not been pushed out of the operating room. No matter how many discussions there were on the internet, Poplar Fruit just lay there motionless. After going through 5 life and death crises, the 2 groups of doctors in Kunming First Hospital worked continuously for more than 20 hours before the operation was finally over. But the doctor's expression was not optimistic. He looked at Fong Beibei and Jing Yujie, who had already woken up, He Wenjue and Meng Sanhua, who had finished bandaging their wounds, and said to Yan Wanxiong and the others, the operation was very successful. He was very lucky. The bullet just missed his heart by less than 3 millimeters. But his condition is still very unstable, so he needs to stay in the ICU for further observation. Poplar Fruit was very lucky. But who knew that his heart was right under the smoking man's muzzle, and it was the mysterious energy in his body that automatically moved his heart away. Chapter 1392. The news that Kiki had been successfully rescued had been confirmed, but the safety of Poplar Fruit was still up in the air. Even the next day, no one had come forward to make a statement. In fact, after the surgery the next day, He Wenjue and Jing Yujie had already arranged for Poplar Fruit to be transferred to another hospital. Jing Yujie's connections were even stronger, so she helped Poplar Fruit to get a special care bed in Beijing Military General Hospital. He Wenjue arranged for a military plane to help send him to Beijing. Fong Beibei and Kiki were worried about Poplar Fruit, so they also followed and stayed by Poplar Fruit's side. They were almost isolated from the rest of the world. They only had phone calls to contact their families and report on Poplar Fruit's condition. Naturally, they would not announce Poplar Fruit's condition on social media. The Cayenne police were still in a terrible fix, thinking about how to deal with the mess left behind by the cross-border rescue, including transporting the injured Ranran back. The moment the factory collapsed, Ranran's desire to survive burst out and she escaped from the edge of danger. Therefore, they did not dare to reveal more information at the press conference. After returning to Nanhu province, the crew was even more tight-lipped. They had been in meetings for several days, and no one knew what they were discussing. However, their attitude caused a heated discussion on the internet. On the internet, fans who were worried about Poplar Fruit kept lighting candles, praying that Poplar Fruit could recover soon. Unfortunately, there was no such thing as willpower in this world. Although they were praying very sincerely, whether Poplar Fruit could wake up from his coma still depended on the efforts of the doctors and Poplar Fruit's own luck. Suddenly, a piece of news, whether true or false, ignited their anger. Poplar Fruit's life is in danger, Mango TV suspects to replace him. Of course, this was just a headline. However, this piece of gossip was very methodical. It analyzed that Poplar Fruit might need a long time to recover after being seriously injured. It also analyzed whether Kiki would be traumatized after being kidnapped during the recording of the program, actually, after the program ended. Combining many factors, it pointed out the necessity of Mango TV changing the host. After this news, there were many rumors that Mango TV's attitude was unclear and that they were actually planning to make a replacement. Some even said that a certain celebrity's manager had received an inquiry from Mango TV. There seemed to be a mastermind behind all of this. Ordinary onlookers didn't know if there was such a possibility, but given Mango Station's nature, who could guarantee that it wouldn't consider things from the perspective of benefits? In the previous Real Men, wasn't the famous grassroots actor unable to participate in the following recording due to a fracture and had no choice but to withdraw? In fact, he later returned, and was then replaced by another guest. Mango TV's program was also recorded and broadcasted in advance, but Mango TV did not seem to stop and continue recording after he recovered. The melodramatic plot that had happened countless times might really happen to Poplar Fruit. Although this news was not confirmed, it immediately made Poplar Fruit's and Kiki's fans, who were anxiously looking forward to Poplar Fruit's recovery, angry. They were arguing, and so were the fans of Where's Daddy? Especially on the third day, when the third episode of Where's Daddy? Was aired as scheduled, their anger almost reached its peak. In this episode, the children were in the earthen building in Min Province. Without the company of their father, they still worked hard to overcome the difficulties and complete the mission. Kiki's 2 tears almost captured the hearts of all the viewers. The first touching tear was when she cried loudly because of the crisis of the duckling. The little girl's kind side was vividly captured by the camera, and this made more viewers like Kiki. The second touching tear was when the little girl called Mama Ma before going to bed at night. She cried because she missed her father so much, and finally fell asleep in a soft sob. It must be mentioned here that Kiki's kidnapping attracted the attention of the entire country. The ratings for this episode reached a shocking 6.8%. The ratings of China's top voice at its peak were probably at this level, right? But no matter what, the scene of Kiki crying in bed made many viewers who were paying attention to Kiki's kidnapping could not help but shed tears. It was too emotional. This episode made almost everyone think of Kiki's pitiful appearance after being kidnapped without her father by her side. And this scene made everyone associate it with the current situation of Poplar Fruit's unknown fate, and Kiki's desolation of being without anyone to rely on. Although many of the scenes were imagined by the viewers, this did not stop them from crying for Kiki. Perhaps this was because they resonated with Kiki through the show, and a halo of empathy affected their emotions. Also, because of the touching and worry, the rumors online that Mango TV was going to replace Poplar Fruit set off waves of anger. Mango TV's Weibo was flooded with comments, and Mango TV's official website was almost crashed by angry fans overnight. Even without anyone organizing, the netizens shouted their own slogan, Poplar Fruit and Kiki are replaced. We won't watch Where's Daddy? Mango TV did have some plans, but at this time, they did not dare to remain silent. The next morning, Mango TV hurriedly posted a statement in response to the rumors on the internet. The general idea was, "Dear viewers, don't worry. As long as Poplar Fruit is willing to persevere and recover well, the production team of Where's Daddy? Would rather pause the recording and wait for their return." Whether or not the recording would really be paused, wasn't it up to Mango TV to decide? If Poplar Fruit's injuries were really serious, and they needed to spend more time and energy to wait, then Mango TV would probably persuade Poplar Fruit to take the initiative to quit. But on the surface, Mango Station was still swearing solemnly to make the audience happy. Even the other 4 fathers, who had already posted on Weibo to pray for Poplar Fruit, were asked by Mango TV to post another Weibo to say that they were with Poplar Fruit and were looking forward to his healthy return. It was a show, but the 4 fathers' concern for Poplar Fruit was indeed sincere. On the day that Poplar Fruit was rescued, they called to ask about his condition. Even after Poplar Fruit arrived in Beijing, the 3 fathers in Beijing wanted to visit him. However, since Poplar Fruit had not woken up yet, Fong Beibei politely rejected their request. Regardless, Mango TV's remedy had a certain effect. Many of the audience members, who were just making a fuss, began to give up. However, Poplar Fruit and Kiki's fans still maintained a reserved attitude. They said that they would continue to pay attention, and Mango TV could forget about secretly replacing them. At this time, what happened to Poplar Fruit, who affected the hearts of hundreds of millions of viewers? Chapter 1393. It was another morning. The sunlight outside the window shone through the greenery and into the room, reflecting a golden glow on the white bed and blankets. Fong Beibei rubbed her eyes and propped herself up from the edge of the bed. There was a caretaker's bed next to her, and Kiki was sleeping soundly on it. The remaining space was enough for Fong Beibei to sleep. However, Fong Beibei was always unwilling to leave Poplar Fruit's side. She always leaned on his bedside and held Poplar Fruit's hand to feel his pulse and body temperature. Only then did she feel a little relieved. The morning sun was very warm, and it could drive away the cold in the hospital. However, because the sun was shining directly into Poplar Fruit's eyes, Fong Beibei stood up and went to the window. She adjusted the curtains in an attempt to block out part of the sun so that it would not affect Poplar Fruit. You don't have to close it. It's fine like this. Suddenly, a hoarse voice came from behind her. It was so gentle that it almost made her cry. Fong Beibei's body suddenly froze. She turned around, and her eyes were already brimming with tears. Silly. Poplar Fruit had already opened his eyes, which had been asleep for a long time. The love in his eyes could almost melt the winter's ice. He said softly and wanted to stretch out his hand, but he realized that his hands and feet were fixed on the bed. His forelimbs were shot and were not fixed. If he randomly twitched like he did on the first night, his wounds would definitely start bleeding again. Fortunately, his neck could still move. He turned his head to look at Kiki, who was sleeping soundly on the bed next to him, and only then did he feel relieved. Kiki is fine. She recovered a long time ago. She was just worried about you. Fong Beibei held back the surging joy of pouncing on him. She knew that Poplar Fruit was now as weak as a child. Under the signal of Poplar Fruit's eyes, Fong Beibei walked over gently and sat beside Poplar Fruit, looking into his eyes. Many of them were affectionate, and there was no need for words. They could make people happy and intoxicated by eye contact. Thank you for your hard work, ahem. Poplar Fruit suddenly coughed twice, which made Fong Beibei nervous. It's nothing. I just feel that my throat is a little dry. Poplar Fruit said. Fong Beibei quickly poured a cup of warm water. Poplar Fruit could not get up, so she found a straw and let Poplar Fruit drink it slowly. When did you wake up? Seeing Yang Gua staring at her, Fong Beibei suddenly blushed. She grabbed her hair with her hand. She then realized that she had just woken up. Her face had not been washed, and her hair was messy. I just woke up, after you let go of my hand. Poplar Fruit's eyes were smiling, and said softly, don't do it anymore. It's still very beautiful. I've always liked it. Glib tongue. Fong Beibei blushed, and said angrily. She was actually very happy. But at this time, after softly talking with Poplar Fruit for a while, Fong Beibei's mind gradually became clear. Also because Poplar Fruit woke up, she had a pillar of support. Many of the suppressed emotions in her heart finally came out. The girl had just woken up, and did not take care of herself. Her hair and face were a little messy. Now suddenly, the tears in her eyes flowed down pitifully. Silly, why are you crying? Poplar Fruit could not move, so he could only ask. You scared the hell out of me. Fong Beibei took the initiative to snuggle up, and gently leaned on Poplar Fruit's chest where there was no bandage. Her hands gently hugged Poplar Fruit's left palm, and then she was caught by Poplar Fruit's left hand. Tell me, how long have I been unconscious? Poplar Fruit knew that he gave Fong Beibei too much of a scare. Not to mention other things, his body was covered with gunshot wounds, so he must have scared her. You've been sleeping for 4 days and 4 nights. Fong Beibei stretched out her hand, and gently stroked Poplar Fruit's face. After sleeping for a few days without taking care of himself, there was a short stubble on his face. So long? Poplar Fruit asked in surprise. After sleeping for 4 days and 4 nights, Poplar Fruit could feel that his body had recovered a lot from its previous state of exhaustion. This was because he had taken a lot of nutrition injections, and the internal energy in Poplar Fruit's body was also slowly circulating. Without Poplar Fruit deliberately controlling it, it was still able to nourish his scarred body. I thought you wouldn't wake up. Fong Beibei wiped the tears on her face, and smiled through her tears. You know, Big Brother, he came back and said that the bullet was in your heart. I thought I would never see you again. At that time, she had forgotten all the bitterness, sadness, and even despair. Nothing could compare to the joy of her beloved waking up at this moment. How could that be? With you thinking about me, how could I not see you? Even if the Grim Reaper was pulling me, I would kick him away and come back to see you. Poplar Fruit said with a rare smile. Nonsense. What Grim Reaper? It was our young family ancestors' blessing that the bullet missed by 3 millimeters and didn't hit the heart. Fong Beibei rebuked. Poplar Fruit's face bloomed with a smile. He grabbed Fong Beibei's hand, his long fingers intertwined with Fong Beibei's fingers, and said with a playful look, our young family ancestor. Ha! After getting the marriage certificate, it was indeed different, even their status had changed. Are you happy now? Fong Beibei knew what Poplar Fruit was laughing about, and pouted her mouth. Fong Beibei didn't believe in Buddhism before, but when Poplar Fruit got into trouble, the young family people at home prayed for the blessing of their ancestors. She also secretly prayed for Poplar Fruit every night, and did no less than Poplar Fruit's mother. It's been hard on you. Poplar Fruit didn't tease her anymore, and gently shook Fong Beibei's hand, and said softly, I'm afraid our wedding will have to be postponed. His and Fong Beibei's wedding was originally scheduled for the beginning of August, but now it seemed that Poplar Fruit, who was seriously injured, would not be able to hold the wedding as scheduled. Of course, even though his body was tied to the bed and looked seriously injured, Poplar Fruit himself knew that as long as he didn't die, the internal energy in his body would allow him to recover quickly. But this would still take a long time. It would take 100 days for his bones and tendons to recover, and he was almost shot into a sieve. It would be considered a miracle if he could recover in 1 or 2 months. I'm fine. As long as you're fine. Fong Beibei couldn't help but shed tears again, although she said she was fine, but these few days of fear, worry and nightmares, the accumulated grievances in her heart and the current sweetness were very complicated. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit was fine. If something happened to Poplar Fruit, Fong Beibei would probably follow what Poplar Fruit said before he went out, and leave with him. But these words didn't need to be said now. Poplar Fruit gestured for Fong Beibei to lower her face, and his left hand gently wiped away her tears, and he smiled confidently, Okay, don't cry. Misfortune is a blessing in disguise. Now that the disaster is over, we can all be fine. Chapter 1394. Poplar Fruit's injuries weren't like other people who would look yellow and emaciated after lying in bed for several days and nights. Although he looked more haggard than before, he was still able to talk and laugh as if he was just a patient with a minor injury. Even the doctor who came over to check on Poplar Fruit when he heard that he had woken up was amazed. Of course, Fong Beibei was still scolded. Although it was Kiki who had pounced on Poplar Fruit and caused his wound to open up, the white-haired doctor still had to criticize Fong Beibei for not doing her duty as a nurse. The nurse came over to change Poplar Fruit's bandages. The wound was still badly mangled and Fong Beibei felt very uncomfortable looking at it. However, the Poplar Fruit's calm and composed appearance gave Fong Beibei some comfort. Didn't Poplar Fruit feel any pain? Actually, it still hurt. However, after experiencing the intense pain of the factory fire, Poplar Fruit's pain tolerance seemed to have improved a lot. After all, Poplar Fruit had survived in the ruins of a battlefield with bloody handprints. What about Big Brother He and the others? How are they? Poplar Fruit finally remembered that when he was dizzy from excessive bleeding, Big Brother He and the others seemed to have been hit by a bomb in order to save him. However, their lives shouldn't be in danger because when he woke up earlier, Fong Beibei had mentioned him. Big Brother He and the others are fine. Fong Beibei said. Big Brother He and Big Brother Meng had a slight concussion, but according to Big Brother He, they'll be discharged soon. Big Brother Yang Jingdong still needs to recuperate. He broke a few ribs. When we return to Yangqing, we'll visit Big Brother Yang Jingdong again, okay? Ah! Fong Beibei exclaimed. Only then did she wake up from her concern for Poplar Fruit. She stuck out her tongue and said embarrassedly, I forgot that I had to inform my family and Big Brother He when you woke up. After a pause, Fong Beibei counted with her fingers and added, and Big Sister Yujia. Oh, and the school, President Chen, and the principal have all called. There are also many people, like Big Brother Lu Yi and Big Brother Che and Juan, who are recording the show. These few days, they all called to visit you in Beijing. We can't let anyone visit you now. We have to observe you for a few days. We can only allow you to visit once your condition is stable, the nurse said through the mask as she bandaged Yang Gua. However, Yang Gua's focus wasn't on the visit. He asked in surprise, Beijing. We're in Beijing. Fong Beibei nodded. She hesitated for a moment and saw the nurse leave after putting on the bandage. She said to Poplar Fruit, it was Big Sister Yujia who helped me find some connections. Because you were bleeding internally and your condition wasn't looking good, Big Sister Yujia said that the doctors in Beijing Military General Hospital are the best in the country, so she sent you to Beijing. Poplar Fruit understood. However, he didn't want to mention Jing Yujia in front of Fong Beibei. Although their relationship was simple, it would become complicated between two women. He smiled and explained to Fong Beibei what had happened in the past few days. For example, how the reinforcements saved them at the last moment and how the police cleaned up the mess. Fong Beibei didn't know much about these things, but Poplar Fruit just wanted to change the topic. When Fong Beibei went outside to call her family to inform them of the good news that Poplar Fruit had woken up, Kiki reluctantly ran over to her father's side and played with her father's hand. With her father by her side, the little girl didn't have to continue being strong. She just had to be her father's obedient daughter. She was the happiest. Papa, let me tell you, I saw Ran that day. Kiki said seriously. Poplar Fruit knew what his daughter was talking about. He asked in surprise, is that really Ran? It's true, it's true. But Ran is so pitiful. Chi-Chi pouted her little mouth and said, it suffered a very, very serious injury and almost died. But I have a feeling that Ran is still alive, and it will be fine, right? Poplar Fruit remembered that in order to save them, Ran was fiercely shot by the group of bandits, and at the last moment, there was a big fire. After all that, Ran was probably in danger. He didn't know how to comfort his daughter, so he just held Kiki's hand and said softly, well, Ran will be fine. He will be very happy. In his heart, Poplar Fruit added softly, in heaven, Ran won't be hurt by human beings anymore. Of course, Ran was actually still alive. Later, Poplar Fruit found out that after they came back, Tian Kaiyun sent a small, inconspicuous team, led by the 3 special forces, back to the factory in the valley and cleaned up all the clues left in the burned factory. He didn't know what method they used to transport Ran back to Mengjing from more than 10 kilometers away. Under the careful care of Ran's father, Mr. Bear, Ran finally recovered after recuperating for nearly a year. Of course, Poplar Fruit and Kiki also visited Ran during this time. Then, the next year, Ran was released into nature again. Poplar Fruit also brought Kiki to send Ran off. Of course, this was all in the future. Now, Poplar Fruit was actually coaxing his daughter. He even said that he wanted to find a carpenter to make a big wooden sculpture of Ran for Kiki at home. After all, Ran was also a life-saving sculpture. Kiki was so happy that she danced with joy. She was in a very good mood. Actually, seeing Kiki laughing so happily, Poplar Fruit secretly felt relieved. He had been very worried that his daughter would be traumatized by the kidnapping and even become autistic. But now, it seemed that Kiki wasn't affected too much. Poplar Fruit didn't want to mention it, but he couldn't help but intentionally or unintentionally say, "Kiki, will you still go to the next recording?" "Yes, I will." Kiki nodded and smiled sweetly. "But I have to wait for Papa to recover before we can go together. That way, Papa can protect me." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Then next time, Papa will definitely protect you and drive away those bad guys as soon as possible. I won't let them get close to Kiki, okay?" Kiki nodded and gestured with her hands as if she was describing a sheep with long horns. She said seriously, "Papa, let me tell you. In fact, I'm not afraid of those bad guys. Because I know Papa will definitely come to save me." "Really?" Poplar Fruit was a little touched and a little surprised. He smiled and said, Yes. I told them that my Papa will become a pleasant sheep. And then defeat you big bad wolves." The little girl clenched her small fist and gestured with her hands, which was very cute. She also forgot that she was crying very hard at that time. But it was a good thing to have this belief. Believing that evil can't prevail over good can maintain the positive energy of optimism. Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter with a smile, and a gratified look appeared in his eyes. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.